Hikmet Abdallah, CEO of FSD, to deliver the welcoming remarks. She is our fearless leader, and she is a transformative leader in Ethiopia's financial sector. She has spearheaded the adoption of international financial reporting standards in Ethiopia as the former Director General of the Accounting and Auditing Board. Her work has been pivotal in strengthening the financial transparency and fostering inclusive growth. Please join me in giving a warm round of applause as we welcome her to the stage.
Those of you that know me know that I'm going to repeat this again, right? I think there are a couple of fasts going on, so I understand if your voices are weak. But anyway, let me switch back to English. Good morning, everyone. Especially welcome to those that have traveled far to be with us today. I'll acknowledge you separately later. Distinguished guests, esteemed speakers, and valued participants. It is a great pleasure to welcome you at this important gathering as we commemorate International Women's Day under the theme Unlocking Potential, Financial Inclusion, and Capital Markets for Women's Economic Empowerment. Let me begin by extending my heartfelt gratitude to our partners who have made this event possible. The G7 partners and the African Development Bank, whose commitment to advancing financial inclusion and gender equality inspires us all. I am equally honored to welcome Her Excellency Samariti Soaso, State Minister for Economic Cooperation at the Ministry of Finance, whose presence today underscores the Ethiopian government's dedication to this cause. We deeply appreciate your leadership and the government's effort to promote inclusive financial policies and strengthen the financial markets ecosystem, creating more opportunities for women to thrive. Today we gather not only to celebrate women's achievements, but also to address the challenges that remain. Financial inclusion and access to capital markets are more than economic issues. They are cornerstones of equity, empowerment, and progress. When women gain equal access to financial resources, they build businesses, create jobs, and drive sustainable development and uplift entire communities. Yet, despite our progress, significant barriers persist. The gender gap in financial inclusion demands our attention, and it is our shared responsibility across government, the private sector, financial institutions, and development partners to close these gaps and foster an environment where women can succeed. This event is a platform for dialogue, collaboration, and action. I urge you to engage actively, share your insights, and explore bold new pathways to accelerate women's economic empowerment. Together, let us commit not just to words, but to tangible steps that advance gender equality and financial inclusion. As we embark on this day, I'd like to recognize the Ethiopian Capital Markets Authority Director General, Hanna Tahliku, and the Chief Executive Officer of the Ethiopian Securities Exchange, Dr. Telahun Kasahun, for their invaluable presence. My thanks extend to Grace Kayakunda, I hope I've said it right, Chief Investment Officer at the African Development Bank, Seifu Tashoma, Country Coordinator at UNCDF, and for the collaboration with Team FSD Ethiopia. We were supposed to have Dr. Sam Dowie, the resident representative of UNDP. I hope he's on his way. Angela, Director of Advisory for Africa Women's World Banking, and our own Teddy Dasso from World Bank. Once again, thank you for your partnership, for our partners, speakers, and all of you for being here today. I look forward for an inspiring and impactful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hikmet, for those inspiring words and for setting the stage for what promises to be a very impactful day. Next, we are going to move on to our first keynote address. It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Grace Kayokunda, Chief Investment Officer at the African Development Bank's East African Regional Office. With over 20 years of experience working with multilateral development banks, Grace is a powerhouse in creating environments that boost entrepreneurship and financial access for SMEs, particularly for women and youth. Grace has been a vocal advocate for digital technology in agribusiness, helping integrate marginalized communities into formal financial systems across East Africa. Please welcome Ms. Grace Kayokunda.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished guests, partners, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me. On behalf of the African Development Bank and the Africa Digital Financial Inclusion Facility, a proud organizing partner, I extend warm thanks to FSD Ethiopia and the G7 Partnership for Women's Digital Financial Inclusion in Ethiopia for bringing us together under the theme Unlocking Potentials, Financial Inclusion and Emerging Capital Markets for Women's Empowerment. These themes today event aligns perfectly to the year's global call for all women and girls, rights, equality, and empowerment. Ladies and gentlemen, today I would like to focus on two vital areas: digital finance and emerging financial ecosystems, and their role in advancing women's rights across Africa, the challenges, opportunities, and the power of collaboration. First, the challenges. In digital finance, women face persistent hurdles: limited access to smartphones, patchy internet coverage, and low digital literacy, particularly in rural areas. In Ethiopia, for instance, fewer women than men hold financial accounts, a gap estimated at 17% in 2022, which has been widened by social cultural norms and inadequate infrastructure. In emerging financial ecosystems, women entrepreneurs struggle to secure funding, often due to biases that deem them less creditworthy. The lack of networks to tap into investment opportunities is another problem. Most women-owned businesses in Africa remain small and informal and struggle to obtain capital they need to grow. Women entrepreneurs face a 42 billion financing gap across Africa, a gap that can be closed by linking digital inclusion initiatives with vibrant capital markets to create a ladder to financial access from a basic mobile account all the way to capital for scaling their businesses. Distinguished guests, now the opportunities. Digital finance is a major contributor for financial resilience and growth as a key driver of economies and social inclusion in Ethiopia and beyond. Digital financial inclusion advances inclusive growth by providing urgent financial support during times of crisis, building domestic savings, providing protection against economic and climate shocks, promoting responsible financing of inclusive technologies, increasing consumer spending within both public and private sectors, boosting entrepreneurship and small and medium enterprises. The second one is capital markets, stock exchanges and bond markets. Venture capital and more play an indispensable role in mobilizing investment for economic development, providing the long-term financing that businesses need to expand and create jobs. They also allow governments to raise funds for development through instruments like bonds. In short, capital markets are engines of economic growth and wealth creation. In Africa, the potential for capital markets is increasingly recognized, though much of it remains untapped. Crucially, capital markets can lock financing for Africa's women entrepreneurs at an unprecedented scale. Africa has the highest rate of female entrepreneur activity in the world. More than a quarter of businesses are started and run by women. Yet women struggle to attract investment. By developing capital markets and you can intentionally include women, Africa can channel much needed capital into the hands of its most dynamic entrepreneurs, sparking wider growth and innovation. The second is collaboration. Collaboration is key to seizing opportunities, and our work with partners across Africa exemplifies that. Together, we are working to drive financial inclusion and intermediation, working with partners like FSD Ethiopia, G7 Partnership for Women's Digital Financial Inclusion in Ethiopia and Africa, the Women World's Banking, JPAL, ID4D, UNCDF. We bring together expertise that can complement our efforts, ensuring no women are left behind Africa's digital and financial transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, African Development Bank strongly believes that a strong, inclusive digital infrastructure and an inclusive and forward-thinking capital market ecosystem are key to fulfilling the potential of digital solutions to build a resilient Africa. Aligning the 10-year strategy, the bank's strategic approach to digital financial services is embodied in the Africa Digital Financial Inclusion Facility, which is a multi-donor trust fund, which was launched in 2019. It works to break down the systemic barriers to growth, access to use of digital financial inclusion in general, as a means of building resilience and with particular focus on women and small and medium enterprises. In Ethiopia, the bank is investing in enhancing the national switch of the Ethiopian project. It's backed by a $2.3 million grant from our Addis initiative, which seeks to upgrade Ethiopia's national payment system to integrate mobile money, internet banking, and more. Led by eSwitch, the development of interoperable platforms, instant payment system, payment gateway, and shared wallet will boost financial inclusion for millions, with a global reach of 60 million % of excluded Ethiopians. The bank, through this initiative, is also investing in assisting and harmonizing payments and settlements in the ECOWAS region. The bank works with central banks, telecom regulators, and others across the continent to improve inclusive policy, regulatory environments, such as a project to promote gender-sensitive digital financial services and policies and regulations across the ECOWAS. This is a $520 grant, which seeks to address disproportionate financial inclusion and gender gaps across the region through collaboration through central banks in the region to develop enabling policies and regulations. Through this initiative, the bank supports development of gender-responsive digital financial solutions, including an initiative to close gender gap in digital microinsurance in Kenya, Nigeria, that has reached 1.4 million smallholder farmers, and through closing the gender gap in in digital microinsurance. It develops gender-responsive credit solutions, seeking to overcome cultural and social barriers for women's access through mobile money agents to lock activities, for example, in Chad. In addition, the African Development Bank and MasterCard Foundation are co-chairing a new initiative called Mobilizing Access to Digital Economy Alliance for Africa, which aims to provide digital access to critical services for 100 million people and businesses in Africa over the next 10 years. In the first phase, the 300 million commitment to the alliance in the initial 5 years aims to bring 3 million farmers in Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria into digital economy via the MasterCard Community Pass. We also have the Affirmative Action for Women, which is a USD 1.5 billion bank-approved investment for Africa women-led small and medium enterprises. This financing pillar of AFAWA incentivizes financial institutions to invest in women, and this financing has been unlocked for more than 7,000 women-led small and medium enterprises. Ladies and gentlemen, turning our focus to capital markets in Ethiopia. Here, the first modern securities exchange was recently launched as a holistic milestone for the country's economy. The advent of Ethiopian Stock Exchange creates a tremendous opportunity to improve access to finance for businesses, including those led by women. Until now, Ethiopia have largely depended on banks, microfinance, or formal savings to fund their ventures. Now, viable companies can potentially raise capital by selling shares or issuing bonds to public, tapping into pools of domestic savings that were previously idle or held in assets like real estate. For women entrepreneurs, this could be transformative. But realizing that these promises require deliberate, collaborative action to make Ethiopia's capital markets inclusive. That means ensuring that the regulatory framework encourages SMEs listings, perhaps through a secondary SME board or simplified requirements, and building capacity so that when women-led businesses are investment ready in terms of governance and transparency. There is a need for capacity building, and we've had so many initiatives in this respect. Ethiopia's journey is just beginning, and it is heartening that the development partners are already lending support. For example, the African Development Bank has approved a new USD $43 million program to boost access to finance to youth and women-led enterprises in Ethiopia, which will strengthen overall entrepreneurship ecosystem. Such support, combined with capital markets reform, can create a pipeline of women-led firms ready to take advantage of the new financing avenues. If successful, Ethiopia can demonstrate how country can leapfrog from limited financing options to diversified landscape where banks, microfinance, and capital markets work in concert, providing everything from a 500 micro loan to a multi-million-dollar equity investment to meet the needs of businesses at each growth stage. Distinguished guests, a key theme of this discussion is that capital markets and digital financial inclusion should not be seen in isolation. They reinforce each other. By linking the two spheres, we can amplify the impact of both. For instance, a woman who uses a mobile platform to receive payments for her small shop can show a record of steady cash flows, which might help her secure a bank loan or even attract an angel investor to expand her businesses. Digital ID systems, eKYC, know your customer processes, are being rolled out in countries like Ethiopia. They make it easier for women to meet requirements to participate in formal financial markets. Whether that's an opening a securities trading account or registering a company for investment. Capital markets can turbocharge digital inclusion for efforts. One way is mobilizing funding for digital infrastructure and fintech innovations. When government issue bonds or engage investors, they can earmark some of that capital projects, like expanding internet access, building digital payment system, or supporting fintech startups that cater for women. That's intentional developing systems that target women. Linking digital finance with capital markets instruments can empower women as investors and not just as borrowers, as savers. Furthermore, digital finance platform can facilitate crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending, which are essentially mini capital markets, connecting those who can invest with those who need financing. We are seeing early examples of crowdfunding in Africa helping women-led ventures raise funds online from broad base of supporters. As regulatory frameworks catch up, these digital capital raising avenues could become more mainstream, complementing traditional exchanges and VCs by funding smaller, community-level women businesses or social enterprises. In summary, the integration of capital markets with digital inclusion means that a woman with a micro business in a rural village can dream beyond getting a microloan. With the right support, she could one day tap into the national or regional capital pools to launch a larger enterprise. It means that benefits of Africa financial growth are shared broadly, with women not only accessing credit, but also participating in investment opportunities. Digital inclusion brings women to a starting line of financial access. Capital markets can then propel them to the finishing line of economic empowerment. I thank you.
Thank you so much to Ms. Grace. That was insight, cooperation, and impact with the potential of an inclusive and digital future. That was a beautiful keynote speech. Now let's keep the momentum going with our second keynote speaker, Mr. Saifu Teshome. He is the country coordinator for the United Nations Capital Development Fund. With over 15 years in finance and MSME development, he brings a wealth of experience from his time at the National Bank of Ethiopia and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming him to the stage.
Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to stand before you as we celebrate the International Women's Day, focusing on the critical challenges of women's financial inclusion and empowerment in Ethiopia. So this day is not just a celebration, but a call to action, a moment to reflect on progresses, and an opportunity to accelerate meaningful change. Since 1982, UNCDF has been working in Ethiopia to enhance financial inclusion and expand access to finance, with particular focus on women and women-owned businesses. We have been providing catalytic blended de-risking facilities to both public and private sector actors to unlock additional resources from the market for sustainable development. Now UNCDF is also finalizing its 5 years project document, which focuses on providing loans concessional loans, grants, and guarantees to MSMEs, especially for marginalized groups like MSMEs owned by women and youth. Yet, despite these efforts, challenges persist. Women still face barriers to accessing financial services. Their representation in the financial sector remains limited, and there is pressing needs for gender-responsive policies and regulations. These gaps are not just statistics. They represent lost opportunities for economic growth and social progress. However, today is not just about identifying challenges. It is about reaffirming our commitment. I believe that collaboration is key, and UNCDF is proud to collaborate with initiatives like FSD and G7 PET platform, which work towards a more inclusive financial landscape. We believe that by emphasizing digital financial services, promoting women's leadership, and fostering entrepreneurship, we can unlock the immense potential of women in Ethiopia. These specific objectives aligns with UNCDF's broader mission, exploring challenges and opportunities in financial service for women, deploying catalytic blended de-risking capital to unlock private and public capital at last mile to serve women and other marginalized groups, increasing women's representation in financial sector, promoting collaborative solutions for entrepreneurship and investment, and advocating for gender-responsive policies and regulation. So here, a key area of focus is access to financial services, which hold great promise for expanding economic opportunities for women. By working together, we can break down barriers and ensure that women are not left behind. UNCDF is actively supporting initiatives that drive this progress, including expanding digital financial literacy and access in rural areas, particularly targeting women entrepreneurs, equipping them with a skill to leverage the digital solution for business management, business growth, and financial management. The second area that we need to focus is developing inclusive financial products tailored to the needs of women, including saving, credit, and insurance. The third one is supporting policy and regulatory reform that promotes gender equality in the financial sector. The fourth one is leveraging data and research to better understand barriers to women's financial inclusion and design effective solutions. And lastly, building strong partnership with government agencies, financial institutions, civil society organizations, and development partners to drive systemic change. This effort, combined with collaboration like those with FSD and the G7 PET, are critical in increasing sustainable, inclusive financial ecosystem for women in Ethiopia. Ladies and gentlemen, let us seize this opportunity to strengthen partnership, share knowledge, and commit to concrete action that will empower women and drive Ethiopian economic growth. Together, we can create a future where every woman has the financial tools and opportunity to thrive. Thank you so much.
Short and sweet. Thank you very much, Mr. Saifu, and thank you to UNCDF. They are one of the G7 partners who are our Unleashing Potentials event today. We want to give a huge gratitude for FSD Ethiopia and for the G7 partners for creating this wonderful space and this platform. Without further ado, now we move on to our honored guest. It is an honor to introduce our distinguished guest for the opening remark, Her Excellency Semerita Sawaso, the State Minister for Economic Cooperation at Ethiopia's Ministry of Finance. Her Excellency has dedicated her career to mobilizing resources for Ethiopia's development with a focus on public-private partnerships. And she started her career over 20 years ago in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, shaping economic diplomacy with Asia and the Middle East. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Her Excellency.
distinguished representatives of federal government agencies, development partners, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to you all. It's truly an honor for me to be here today as we gather to celebrate in advance the International Women's Day, a moment to acknowledge the incredible contributions of women and reaffirm our commitment to their rights, equality, and empowerment. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to FSD Ethiopia and the G7 Partnership for Women's Digital Financial Inclusion for organizing this important event. The theme, Unlocking Potentials, Financial Inclusion and Emerging Capital Markets for Women's Economic Empowerment, aligns perfectly with this year's global vision for all women and girls, rights, equality, and empowerment. As many of you know, women make up nearly half of Ethiopia's population and are essential to our communities and our future economic growth. While significant progress has been made in enhancing women's participation across various sectors, including politics, education, and the workforce, a lot of challenge remains. There are still barriers that prevent women from fully recognizing their potentials and achieving true gender equality. Ladies and gentlemen, the government of Ethiopia is implementing the second phase of its homegrown economic reform program, which has a strong emphasis on implementing the financial inclusion strategy. This strategy aims to reduce poverty, promote economic growth, enhance financial sustainability, and ensure gender equality. However, there continues to be a gap between women and men in terms of access to financial services, and this gap has even widened in some cases. Although mobile money and digital services are expanding, many women still face challenge due to limited literacy, inadequate infrastructure, and financial products that are tailored to their needs. That being said, Ethiopia has made remarkable progress in digital finance. Through the Digital Ethiopia 2025 initiative, digital accounts reached over 102.8 million by mid-2023, driven by platforms such as Telebr and CBE-BIR, which have extended their reach to rural areas. Regulatory reforms at the National Bank of Ethiopia have enabled fintech companies to provide payment services, leading to significant increase in digital payments, which amount to 5 trillion birr in 2023. This progress has laid a solid foundation, but it is essential that we continue to build upon and ensure that women are fully included in the digital financial ecosystem. Ladies and gentlemen, financial inclusion is a key driver for empowering women. When women have access to financial services, they can start businesses, create jobs, and support their families, contributing directly to the growth and development of our nation. The role of the capital markets in this aspect is very critical, as they provide essential funding opportunities for women entrepreneurs, helping them scale their business and drive innovation. The government of Ethiopia remains committed to ensuring that financial systems are designed to benefit women. Efforts such as gender-responsive budgeting, a comprehensive financial inclusion strategy, and the promotion of digital finance are all aimed at creating an inclusive economy. These initiatives are aligned with the goals of Digital Ethiopia, which seeks to build a more sustainable and equitable economic development environment. The Ministry of Finance has also developed an internal gender equity strategy, created toolkits for gender-responsive budgeting, and launched budget tracking and tagging initiatives. These measures are intended to ensure that women are empowered economically, socially, and growth is inclusive and sustainable for all. Ladies and gentlemen, today I would like to highlight two important areas. First, digital finance services. While Ethiopia 2025 has laid the groundwork, more collaboration is needed to fully understand and address the specific barriers women face in accessing these services. The G7P ET platform offers an excellent starting point, and I'm encouraged that further partnerships will ensure that we reach all women. Second, emerging capital markets. Innovative financing methods such as crowdfunding and gender bonds can help women entrepreneurs who face challenges in accessing loans. By learning from best practices and promoting gender financial leadership for all women, we can build a more inclusive financial system here in Ethiopia. Before I conclude, I would like to reaffirm our collective commitment to building a financial system that's accessible and inclusive for all Ethiopian, especially women, whether as entrepreneurs, investors, or leaders. Achieving this is not the responsibility of one entity, but for all of us to come together and work along this vision. By doing so, we can turn challenges into opportunities, create a more resilient and equitable and prosperous country and an economy that's beneficial for all. This is crucial that we continue to work together to unlock the full potential of every woman and girl in Ethiopia. We must ensure that all women have the opportunity to thrive and contribute to our society's progress. I truly appreciate the effort of everyone involved in today's event and making this a reality. I'm confident that the discussions and insights that are going to be shared will be inspiring and meaningful to promote action, to make rights, equality, and empowerment a reality for women. With that, I would like to officially open this event and wish you a fruitful collaboration and deliberation. I thank you all.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your leadership, for your commitment, your advocacy, and for those powerful words that have officially opened today's event with great inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, how is your morning going so far? Yeah? I promised you it would get better. So, next on, we are going to shift gear and we're going to hear from Leah for a key presentation. Ms. Leah Dejanu is community engagement expert at UNCDF. Leah is a certified trainer and a coach who has worked across Ethiopia and Canada empowering communities and youth. She once served as a youth coordinator at Africa Center's The Come Up in Canada, uplifting young people of African descent. So today she will walk us through the gender disaggregated mapping tool, a vital step toward understanding and addressing financial inclusion gaps. Let's give a warm round of applause to Leah. This will be a 15-minute presentation and then we will be back.
Thank you, Adom. And yes, I will keep it at 15 minutes. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, our esteemed guest, Her Excellency. It is an honor to share and showcase the gender disaggregated data tool. Is the clicker? Oh, yes. Sorry. My apologies. Okay, there it is. Thank you. I'm currently working as a community engagement manager at UNCDF Ethiopia, specifically in the gender department. And prior to that as well, I worked for the Women's Digital Financial Inclusion Hub, it's currently still working. And a huge part of our work, especially within the finance sector, is to instill a gender intentional framework and what that might look like. But obviously that cannot be done without, of course, sufficient data and support in the policy sector. So the UNCDF Gender Disaggregated Data Mapping Toolkit is a resource designed to accompany institutions in assessing and addressing their issues regards to gender disaggregated data, no matter where they're at in their data journey. As we know, of course, data can be a bit challenging. Updated data might be challenging, but it can start with us, especially us having this toolkit as a baseline, because I know and I understand, where do we start with gender disaggregated data? Where do we start? Where do we look? But when it comes to producing our own and where we are in that journey, I do think that this toolkit has definitely benefited us. Oh. Okay. Oh, there we go. So rather this being an isolated objective, collecting and analyzing the GDD should be seen as a part of the greater effort to enhance the overall impact and sustainability of policies and regulations. Essentially, it shouldn't be an afterthought. I think gender desegregated data shouldn't be something that is so far-fetched. Why not we intentionally start whenever we are doing projects, initiatives, policies, advocacy? Why don't we start with gender desegregated data? Why isn't it adopted in our general process? So essentially, the tool is designed as to continuously and cyclically find this data within our organizations, no matter where we are, whether we are staff within these financial institutions or regulatory systems, or if we are specifically catering to a specific market of women. And beyond its goal of reducing the gender gap, the other applications of this assessment tool include improving gender policies and strategies, enhancing and better evaluating the impact of financial inclusion efforts, shaping G2P programs, bettering employment and entrepreneurship programs, and strengthening and understanding and designing solutions over indebtedness. So who's the audience? Okay, thank you. So the tool is for anyone who wants to understand and improve their gender desegregated data journey, the data architecture and data management cycle. But more specifically, this tool is designed for policymakers, financial sector authorities, and financial service providers. Your organization can also use it to demonstrate the needs for increased capacity to collect aggregated and use of gender desegregated data, shape policy and regulatory and supervisory response in coordinating with like-minded actors, with different stakeholders and different actors in the ecosystem, assess staffing and technical expertise. Like I mentioned earlier, within our organizations, are we really embodying this? Leverage insights to make informed decisions and drive actionable outcomes, demonstrate the need for increased capacity to collect, I already said that. Identify availability, quality, state of technology, and architecture of gender desegregated data. Review data dissemination practices and sharing strategies. And finally, assess internal practices for hosting and storing data. Okay, thank you. So, who would be the audience in the greater scale? Who would be the use cases? So when data drives decisions, who are those who benefit? When institutions use GDD to shape their policies, products, and services, they don't just close the gender gap, they empower individuals and communities. Specifically, as an example, and this could be applicable to any context, any country, but mothers receiving social transfers benefits from faster and more transparent G2P payments directly into her own accounts. Women entrepreneurs in a rural area can access tailored credit products that meet their business needs, and small business owners avoid debt traps through better designed consumer protection policies. And as Grace mentioned earlier, a bit about the gap, here is a couple figures, again, from the World Bank Findex study that was done in 2022, that is an example of whether it's ownership of financial institution between the two genders, whether it's women, when it's women or men, there is a sufficient gender gap between the two. And then in addition to that, there's a sufficient gender gap between ownership of mobile and mobile money accounts. Yes, these things are improving as time goes on. However, the gap is widening. This is another figure from the same study. Again, a sufficient gap between the two genders. whether it's someone who made a digital payment versus someone who received a digital payment. And then similar for different savings outcomes as well, saving mechanisms. Who saved at financial institutions, who's using a savings club, a group or a dir, outside of the family, and who is actually using a mobile money account. These figures are included in this program just because, as well, I wanted to show you guys the data gap and the gender gap as well, since it is a substantial amount. However, I think with the GDD toolkit, this is kind of a way that can kind of weave into how we intentionally move forward to close that gap. And specifically for financial inclusion programs, the different sectors on how it can help, how the GDD tool can help is designing more accessible loans and saving insurance products. Who benefits from it, which would be women entrepreneurs. G2P payments, which is direct payments to women-owned accounts. Everyone would be benefiting from this. And over-indebtedness solutions. The GDD tool can help early detections of risky lending patterns and would help low-income women and small business owners. And finally, employment and entrepreneurship programs. We would have more gender-intentional skills and training and funding, which would also help young women displaced and small business owners. Okay, so here's a quick demo on how to not only use it, but I'll also explain after where you download it. So initially it's an Excel file where you would download it and you would click the stakeholders and goal option. You can press play, it's a video. Next, you would select your stakeholder. Is I set up? Okay. So you would select a stakeholder you represent, whether you're a policymaker, financial authority, or other. In the demo video, you would select other, and it would be an FSP, so financial service provider. Next, you would define your GDD problem statement, which you would type in either of these boxes. And then when you're already aware, if you are already aware of your GDD gaps, fill in the tabs that are relevant to you if there are any gaps or questions that are still pending. If not, and you are not yet aware of any of the gender disaggregated data gaps, you can fill in all the tabs to where you will find. So you will find the next steps tab. And this tab will provide you with an overall understanding of high-level next steps to reflect upon after completing the assessment. You will additionally find additional practice tools, briefs on related topics, guides for assessing markets and regulatory landscapes, selecting viable policy options, consulting with stakeholders, and creating staff training programs on how to do that. I think that was 15 minutes. So if you guys do want to download the GDD tool and try that within your organizations or structures, please feel free to scan the QR code, and if you guys are interested in even testing it out, feel free to contact me. I will be available throughout this event, so you can flag me, and I'm very happy to also guide you, set an appointment or meeting, and we can walk through the GDD tool as well. Thank you guys. I really appreciate your attention. I hope this was a very fruitful presentation.
Thank you so much, Talia. That was 15 minutes, actually a little short, so I'm very happy with that. And it's really insightful as well. I feel like this tool can be very helpful for a lot of the data mapping that we are going to need in terms of figuring out the disaggregated, like like where does gender play a role in terms of finance, and where do we stand exactly? I think we don't have a lot of those mapping tools, and I think having this one is going to be very helpful in the long run. So it is time for our first panel discussion. We will be having a health break after. So this will be a 45-minute panel discussion on exploring innovative solutions to enhance women's access to digital financial services. To guide this session, we're going to welcome our moderator, Dr. Ruth Goodwin, the founding manager, director of the UN-hosted Better Than Cash Alliance. Did you know that Ruth's work has helped shift over 90% of the global GDP toward responsible digital payments since 2014? I did not. I found out today. She is a global expert on financial equality for women, perfect for leading this conversation. Please give her a warm round of applause for Dr. Ruth, who will be introducing our panelists.
Great to see everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It is a real honor to be back in Addis. Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to ask our panelists to come and sit down, and then I can introduce them so that you don't look at their back when they're coming up. So our colleagues from the African Development Bank, from UNDP, from the World Bank, and also from Women's World Banking, please come and take a seat, and then I'll introduce you so people can see you. Do you need a hand? Yeah, there you go. Great. So while they're getting there, we've just heard this panel about gender disaggregated data. So think about for yourself, for your own programs. If you had to score yourself from 1 to 5 on gender disaggregated data, where 1 is you're just beginning and 5 you're already done, think about where you would score yourself. You're just beginning, it's 1. You're already done, it's 5. I will not ask you to raise your hand because I think there's going to be quite a few who are 1 and 2. So think about that and then realize there's a great opportunity. This is all about opportunities for improving your gender disaggregated data. And we're going to come back to that with our panelists. So we have an amazing panel, ladies and gentlemen. You already heard Grace Kiunkunda, who's the Chief Investment Officer for the East Africa region at the African Development Bank. Who remembered 42 billion? 42 billion. That's the financing gap for women on the continent, women entrepreneurs. But she's doing something about it. So thank you for your keynote. We'll look forward to having you with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the resident representative of UNDP with us. Dr. Samuel Doe is very experienced with the UN across the continent as well. We're delighted to have your experience with us today. Women's World Banking. Women's World Banking has so much experience across the globe, and we have the Africa representative for the policy and advisory services across the continent. Both Angela and Grace have come from Nairobi to share with us their regional experience, their continental experience, as well as Ethiopia. So Angela, we're delighted that you're with us today. Thanks so much for coming. And Teddy Todros, who's been with financial sector in Ethiopia for over 10 years. Now you're representing the World Bank as a financial sector specialist. So please welcome our great panel. So let's start with just hearing a little bit about what each of them are doing, because you heard a little bit from Grace, but I'm going to start with our most experienced representative here from UNDP. Tell us about what you're doing here on digital financial services in Ethiopia, and particularly we heard from the Minister about the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, how you're helping achieve that.
Thank you, and it's really a pleasure to be here. I think it's a very special time to talk about gender equality, and gender equality especially in the place of our economies and the economies in Africa. Let me start off first by saying, and I think Grace indicated a lot of that in her keynote speech, what are we losing by the limited participation of women in our economies? And I think for those of you who follow UNDP's work in 2016, in our report on our Human Development Report on Africa, we found that in Africa, every single year, we lose 95 billion United States dollars due to the limited access of women in our formal economies. $95 billion. Far more than what Africa receives in aid. We also lose our fight against poverty by limiting women's access to our economy. In our report, we found that at least 70% of the poverty demography is women in Africa. 70%. So if we don't have intentional, targeted investment in really opening the doors to our women coming and participating actively in our economy, these are the two pungent consequences we have. So because of that, in Ethiopia, I'm glad that the Director General of the Ethiopia Capital Market Authority is here. UNDP has partnered with the Ethiopian capital market to establish, and with the National Bank of Ethiopia, to establish the Innovative Finance Lab. And the primary intention of the lab is to capacitate, to help medium-sized businesses in Ethiopia to flourish. And we have two approaches in that lab. First is we understand that women are not out of our formal economies because they have not tried. We know that over 90% by ILO report of those in the informal sector are women. So they've tried to open this door, and that's why I really love this picture of a bold, ready woman trying to enter that gate. So we have put in place this Innovative Finance Lab to intentionally create the policy remedies necessary to allow women to have that freedom to access the formal economy, the capacity deficit that women's businesses have to help them build those capacity, the financing, the initial resourcing gap that women have. So three interventions that we are trying to put in place through the ECMA and UNDP's partnership.
I'll keep moving here while you fix that. Thank you. So thank you so much, Samuel. That's fantastic, inspiring what UNDP is doing. Let's move to the World Bank now. And you've been working in financial inclusion, financial sector development for some time, but you've done a lot of research. So help us with the data. Help us understand what you have learned from your research and then at the World Bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. So, hello everyone. And as mentioned, as the World Bank, we are one of the key partners in the different aspects of, development policy, financial sector programs in Ethiopia. The World Bank has been working and supporting, closely with working with the Ministry of Finance, but also with the National Bank of Ethiopia in terms of advancing financial inclusion for several years. We have also been one of the lead implementing partner of the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, the first one, which was launched in 2017. In addition, we also provide several, research and data. Also, I'm glad to see some of the Findex report being mentioned here that are critical in terms of to understand, where we are and also, also implement actions towards, closing the gender gap, but also advancing financial inclusion in general.
Which number do you particularly bring attention to on women?
Sure. So, definitely, the key figure is that we are making significant progress in terms of financial inclusion, where we were around 22% of adults. As of 2021, 2022, that data in terms of at least having basic bank account has reached around 45% or close to 50%. And since then, because of the significant progress that was made, particularly in mobile money and other expansion of bank branches and advancement in MFIs, that number is significantly expected to grow. And we have a new Findex that will be coming out late 2025 to late 2026 that will significantly show progress, to the target is by 2025 to reach around 70% of adults.
So watch the space. We're going for 70%
definitely.
this year.
So maybe one key figure to highlight is the gender gap in financial inclusion, although that we have significant progress in moving, the financial inclusion agenda, something that is actually regressing and, that's not even doing, that's not just staying there, that's not improving, but also going even worse is the inclusion of women, whereby, in average, whereby around close to 50% or 48% of adult men have access to a basic account, but in terms of women, that access is less than 35%. But this is, we're talking about basic account ownership, right? So, but if you look at, we have a new report that's coming maybe end of this month, that also shows the financial inclusion ladder, whereby even when women have access to account, but their usage and their level of usage and advancement is very limited. So that also shows that it's not only about, definitely we need to, push the envelope in terms of opening an account, but also making sure that everyone has, regular usage and advanced access to the full suite of financial services, not just only payment, but also savings, credit, and insurance, and now we have also investment opportunities that are also opening up.
Fantastic. So there's lots of opportunities. That's clearly a big message here. And so if you're talking to people on your table, please look for opportunities to collaborate and address these opportunities that are coming here. Women's World Banking. We're moving from Ethiopia to the continent now. Women's World Banking, you have done lots of work on the Women's Digital Financial Inclusions hubs, but you've also had huge success in your work with women entrepreneurs. Do tell us, give us a snapshot of what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Dana Darachu. I had to learn a few words because every time I'm in Ethiopia, people say hello to me in Amharic. So I'm glad to be here. So Women's World Banking, our work is around promoting women's financial inclusion as a pathway to women's economic empowerment, and we work with financial service providers and also policymakers, not only advocating, but also providing technical support and advisory services. So specifically around digital financial services, the kinds of projects we've implemented with different financial service providers have actually shown us that we've actually operated in markets where the accounts are available and the challenge is the usage. That comes out of perhaps the target group, in this case women, not being aware of the existence of these accounts or these solutions, or not appreciating how they benefit them. And also when we go and work with the FSPs, we also see that some of the products are not designed in a way that they are easily accessible to this target segment. So our projects have involved digital activation initiatives where we work with the FSPs to, first of all, refine their products and make sure that they are accessible to women, and also create a go-to-market strategy. How do we make sure that the women understand, first of all, they know and they understand how to use these solutions that are available for them. With regard to the WDFI Hub, Women's Digital Financial Inclusion Hub, that's an initiative that we did together with the UNCDF. We implemented in Indonesia while the UNCDF team was implementing here in Ethiopia. So, this initiative is where we bring different stakeholders together. So the policymakers, the regulators, the financial service providers, and the women's advocacy groups to bring the women's voices to the table. And so we bring them together to, to have a concerted effort to work on a particular issue. And so, for example, where we implemented the hub in Indonesia, we had women's groups being engaged in conducting financial literacy within their group, so they are empowered to do that with tools, and then they are able to deliver it in a manner that's relatable to the women. And then we've also had our desire, initially we were a convener, but we want to step back and have, the government or the country take this forward. And so we recently had the Ministry of Economic Affairs adapting the hub and issuing a decree that the National Financial Inclusion Council, which they chair, is going to run with the hub going forward. And they've created different working groups to do that.
Great. So there's obviously lots of experience at Women's World Bank, and Angela will be here. So if you want to come and ask her about how her experiences relates into your own work here, then please do. That's just an intro. And Grace, we know a lot about what you've been doing on the continent from your initial speak. Can you talk a little bit more about Ethiopia? Really exciting on the Ethio switch example that you were talking about.
So, yeah, thank you very much. Actually, we've done a lot in Ethiopia, but I think we can do more. I'd start with...
I think everyone will agree with you on that, right? We can do more.
For example, we provided the initial technical assistance to establish the capital markets. And
can you hear Grace okay?
You
can hold it a bit closer?
I mean, take mine. Yeah. I think it's exciting to see that our initial efforts have yielded results. Then in terms of digital services, we've supported eSwitch, which is under implementation. Technology, I think it's just starting. So we are looking forward to, once the interoperable platform is operational, there'll be more chances of women having access to the services. But generally, we've also recently approved a project, $42 million, targeting women and youth to providing a variety of financial products, from guarantees to soft loans to capacity building, targeting women and youth. And it was approved recently, and the implementation should start soon. And that's another initiative that can benefit women. But in addition to that, really the bank...
Who are you working with on that one? I'm sure everyone wants to know.
We had started with the Development Bank of Ethiopia, but I think that may change. So maybe with the holding company, we are still negotiating with the government. So at this point, it's work in progress, but it's been approved by the board. That's what is important.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then generally we have a specific initiative I talked about, the AFAWA, the Affirmative Action for Women, and it's cuts across Africa. And we have mobilized about $1.7 billion for that. And it provides mainly grant funding, capacity building, policy initiatives. And we try to work with financial institutions to incentivize them to provide additional funding. But beyond that, really our strategy, the 10-year strategy, we have a specific 10-year strategy for women empowerment and increasing access to finance, whereby we try to provide skills and to influence ecosystems so that there are products that are financial products that are specifically formulated targeting women. And we are also trying to do a lot on the capital markets front, not in Ethiopia, but globally, and we are moving forward. I know recently we had a proposal from the Ethiopia Stock Exchange, working with the Nairobi Stock Exchange. It wasn't successful, but we are working with them to see how they can actually design intentional intervention where small businesses which are women-led can actually structure and have governance structures that can enable them list. And it will be an ecosystem approach whereby you have the regulator, you have the stock exchange, creating and enabling a situation where these small businesses, if they have the prerequisite requirements, can actually list and mobilize funding.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I know that Hikmet will be leading the panel subsequently that will include the stock exchange and the capital markets authority.
Yeah. So generally, every project we do, and we do a lot of investment in the financial sector, we make sure that there is an intentional activity to enable women access finance, be it if we are giving a loan to banks, if we are supporting the central banks, or if we are supporting the establishment of new institutions. We make sure they have policies specifically to develop products that are geared to supporting women in businesses.
So that's
thank you so much.
Fantastic. Yeah. So great news. So that's now you have a snapshot of all the great work being done by our panelists. So we've got 2 more rounds of questions. We're going to be focusing on innovative solutions now, and then on gender disaggregated data. So if there are comments that you want to make to each other, I think I'm supposed to be sitting on that chair there, aren't I? Yeah, it suddenly appeared, so I'm going to go and take a seat. So there, now I'm not standing and talking to you, I'm with you, so that's great. Grace, since we were just talking to you, could you just give us a very quick idea? Again, I'm going to ask everyone to be really quick. This is not specific to Grace. Could you give us a really quick idea of how the solutions that you're working on make a difference in women's lives?
Just to give you an example, the Africa Digital Financial Initiative, we've done, and I mentioned it in my keynote speech, we have supported the ECOWAS region where they are intentionally reviewing the regulations and policies to help women access finance. But maybe more specifically, the AFAWA initiative, we have provided funding to different financial institutions where they actually develop specific and intentional products for women.
Great.
Like guarantees, we provide guarantees, and you know the biggest problem for women is collateral. Even those who have businesses, collateral can be a challenge. By providing a guarantee to a financial institution, they actually, in a way, tend to reduce the collateral requirement. By training the financial institutions on ways that they can assess small businesses and target women, then you create a window where women can actually come in. We also go beyond that. For example,
you've just given me a great introduction to what Teddy's going to be talking about. So can I just ask you to pause there? I'm going to come back to you.
Okay.
Because what you were talking about was collateral, the lack of collateral, and the research that the World Bank has done focuses on barriers such as the lack of collateral. So rather than just talking, maybe I can just build on that, and then we can keep going on that. So because we've got to look at the challenges and then how the solutions have come. So, Teddy.
Sure. Thank you. So maybe, as many of you may know, one of the World Bank wholesale lending facility that's been running for the last 10 years is called WEDEP. It's a dedicated credit line for women entrepreneurs. The last round, we had around $100 million dedicated facility through Development Bank of Ethiopia and through our partner financial institutions, which includes both banks and microfinance institutions. And through this program, we were able to, it's one of the only available source of funding that's dedicated to women entrepreneurs, women-owned MSMEs. But one of the challenges that we see is that even when these credits are available, there is still, particularly in Ethiopia and also in some other African countries, there is a heavy reliance on collateral being the requirement. So even though there is, credit line available, one, it's never enough. Second, there is still a collateral requirement. That means particularly for women who don't have assets that can be pledged as collateral, they still struggle to access these loans, in addition to other challenges such as cost and so on. So to counter that, we have created, as part of WEDEP, a $10 million facility called Innovative Finance Window for Innovations for Financing Women Entrepreneurs, where we have actually been exploring different types of alternative means of providing credit that doesn't necessarily rely on collateral. So one of the pilots that we have done is psychometric-based assessment. It's like a personality test, and based on that assessment, you have a credit score, and that will inform in terms of either to waive or to reduce the collateral requirement. We have also been working with our partners, particularly promoting cash flow-based lending, particularly in the MFI sectors, small businesses that do not necessarily have the systems in place or accounting systems that you cannot be used to understand the business, but by promoting certain development of tools to assess the use of cash flow to access credit. And most recently, we have partnered with Nat Bank. I'm sure Nat Bank people are here, when they were rolling out the digital loans, uncollateralized digital loans, which are actually small loans that are provided through credit scoring system. And through this, by offering this kind of alternative means, definitely the product terms and conditions vary, the amounts vary, and so on, based on the risk assessment and the resources. But we are able to see that, you can actually, one, be more efficient with the fund that is available, but you can also cater to the different types of customer segment, particularly women. So perhaps maybe a manufacturing women entrepreneur engaged in manufacturing may require lease financing solution to acquire a machinery and so on. Perhaps some others may require a working capital to pay off, to buy inventory or to pay off rent or salaries. But we have also seen some unique cases where this even small loans are being used in uniquely. For example, we have recently discovered certain businesses which are engaged in service provision. They always find it an issue when every time that they have to bid for a contract, they have to submit a bid bond guarantee, right? So even for this, we have seen some businesses start to use this kind of digital loans, small loans with no collateral, and it's quite quick. It meets their immediate needs. So these are some of the alternative means that we have been exploring. And the idea is that not only to rely on those pilots and small cases, but to generate evidence on what works, and potentially that can be adapted and scaled by other partners as well.
And I think in your report, your 2023 report, you were talking about the importance of the movable collateral registry here in Ethiopia that's making a big difference, so people can register cars or fridges, not land titles. So as alternative collateral, right?
Correct. So that's one of the initiatives that we are working with the National Bank of Ethiopia to establish the movable collateral, but also to diversify the type of collateral that can be pledged. So that means more people and more, for example, farmers will be able to access loans without having, typically a house or a car.
Fantastic. And on that issue, you've worked on this across the continent, right, Angela, on how to overcome the barriers like the collateral issue. Could you just tell us a bit about how you've overcome those barriers? With innovative solutions, I think, is particularly what we're looking for.
Okay. I think the solutions are generally the same. So if I would pick on the issue of access to credit and some of the solutions that he's talked about, for example, building the capacity, what we've done, building the capacity of financial service providers and getting them to be able to offer cash flow-based lending solutions so as not to rely on physical collateral, working with regulators and advocating for the implementation of the movable collateral registries. So I think the solutions are more or less similar, but what maybe I would like to talk about is how the concept of the WDFI hub can help progress this quickly. Because, when you bring the different stakeholders together, then they are able to articulate their issues. You bring the women's voices and they are here saying, we cannot access the movable collateral registry, or they are not even aware of that. So then we create strategies of how do we make them aware of the movable collateral registry.
Can
Or
I
we
just
have-
underline that point, the importance of women's voices? It's
Yes.
not just the World Bank research or the amazing work that's happening on the continent. It's understanding the voices of women so that their experience is what you work with.
Exactly, and having them on platforms like this. So when we say we have movable, then they will say we are not aware, or those who are aware and have tried to use it, then they talk about what challenges they're experiencing. And the private sector and the public sector people in the room get to hear that and create solutions around that. And then when we work together, we also have, we create indicators for measuring outcomes. So we say this is an initiative, and each of the different stakeholders have the outcome indicators that they'll be reporting on. So for example, the women advocacy groups can, their initiative would be to go and educate their fellow women about these solutions that are available to them. And they come back and report. We have trained X number of women have reported that they have accessed this. You know, examples like those financial service providers come and say, you know, we have issued, they are requiring them to report on how many women they are lending to through cash flow-based lending, how they are using the collateral registry. They report on that, okay? Then that's how we get these things moving.
Fantastic. So you're really using the data. We're going to come back to the data question to hold people to account for the performance. That's fantastic news. Samuel, tell us about how you're overcoming barriers. We're in the UNDP context.
So, I mean, building on what colleagues have said, there are three areas that UNDP has attempted to help remove barriers that women are confronted with. First is in 2016, we worked with the Development Bank of Ethiopia to establish a credit risk guarantee fund. And that fund was made ready for women to have at least 50% guarantee of the loan that they access from the bank, 50% collateral to women. So that still exists. And my colleague Gizacho, who is here, who leads that program, can
you
be
wave
consulted.
so everyone can see you?
Gizacho, yes.
Great. If you want to know about the credit guarantee, this is the guy to talk to.
You can speak to that guy, and he has that he has the information. So that's the first level of work, having the fund to really mitigate the collateral barriers, the barriers that women face vis-a-vis that. And then the second is getting women investment ready. And that's what has been also talked about, providing training, a boot camp for women to get ready, look at the tools that they are confronted with once they access the bank. And that is through also our innovative finance lab that provides those services. The third is building a network amongst the women themselves. Recently, we launched with the Ministry of Innovation and Technology what we are calling Women Startups Funders Program. And we had a boot camp with them as well. And then they talked about many of the challenges they are confronted with, finding innovative ways to really remove those barriers. So these are the three modalities that we have been using to address this very important age-old challenge that women are confronted with.
So the Women's Startup Funders Group that you're starting here, if people are interested, they can come and talk to you more about that.
Yes, they can also talk to the same guy. He's
great.
Yes.
Great. You wonder why there's a QR code here. It's for questions. So we're going to have time at the end for questions. And so please put them there. And I believe I've got to go and get them from an iPad that's on that table, but I'll get it in a minute. So please put your questions in there. If we don't get to them right now, FSD will still be working with those questions in terms of responding to you, but also in terms of being able to create future ideas for innovative solutions. So, Grace, you started off us on a great series of inputs. Thank you so much. Is there anything more that you want to add about overcoming barriers or innovative solutions to overcome those barriers?
To address some of the challenges that women face, we are trying to build, support different players in the markets by building payment systems by improving cybersecurity.
Oh, very important, the consumer protection aspect, yes.
E-identification, so that, as I said in my keynote speech, if a woman entrepreneur can be tracked through the mobile wallet transactions, he can have a track record. Information about some of the enterprises has always been a challenge, especially in accessing credit or even accessing basic financial services. So just by having a system that can enable one to be tracked, it enables them to have a credit history, and so that's one of the solutions we're looking at.
Fantastic.
In addition to the various,
I know that you've got so much to share, but we are going to keep it quick now. Thank you. People will be able to follow up with Grace. We're so grateful that she's come to join us today. So, thinking about gender disaggregated data, because as Angela said, unless you have the data, you can't hold people to account. And we're all on a journey when it comes to data, gender disaggregated data. So let's just talk about how we use the data in ways that are improving the programs that we're working with. So Samuel, since you were talking about some of the specific examples, maybe you could just share how you use the data in those examples, how you use gender disaggregated data?
Right. Recently, we are drafting our next 5-year program. And in the design of that, we got really stark data in Ethiopia that really got me thinking about the way we redesign our development intervention. Data that relates to women's access to finance, data that relates to women's presence in the labor market, data that relates to rural women vis-a-vis urban women. And there's a huge contrast when you look at the variance between those in the urban area, those in the rural area, women in the workforce, women's access, women's income. And all of that, I did not know even before in the design. So being confronted with that data helped shape entirely our next 5-year program on how we want to engage and how we want to prioritize, not just because of the question of equity, but because of prosperity, that we are losing a lot because of the limited presence of women in many of the spheres of the economy in Ethiopia. And I think that has been quite informative. And so one of the things that we have tried to do, working closely with the Ministry of Planning and Development, is to work in really strengthening the development data in Ethiopia.
Yes,
and this is where
news.
we want to invest in the coming, really, 5 years.
Fantastic. So it's great news. We've got somebody who's investing in gender disaggregated data for the next 5 years. So if you want to find out more about that, that's great news. Thanks so much, and wish you every success with the Ministry of Planning on that. Angela, how are you using... we're going slightly different order, sorry, I didn't mean to surprise you. How are you using it also to evaluate your effectiveness? Because that's what you were talking about. Samuel's using it for his planning. You're using it for evaluating your effectiveness, if I heard correctly.
Sure. So we use data at different levels. So I'll give maybe 2 examples. One, when we are working directly with financial service providers, whatever project we're implementing, we start by collecting baseline data. So for example, if we are working on a credit product, we will get baseline data that is gender disaggregated to see how many people are accessing this solution by gender. And when it's, for example, credit, we go deeper into, number of loan applications by gender, number of approvals by gender.
So very granular data.
Very granular. Yeah. Repayment level by gender. So we look at the state where we are at now, and then we implement the solutions that we're implementing, like introducing cash flow-based lending and all. And then at the end, maybe 24 months down the line, we want to see how that has changed. And, we've seen change with institutions that we have worked with, where you have, for example, one case we worked with a bank where of about 50% of the customers, account holders were women, but under 25%, around 25% only were accessing loans. And so when we looked at it, the issue was just that, asking for physical collateral that the women don't have. So created the cash flow-based lending solution, and we were able to see women accessing and getting approved for the loans.
Fantastic.
At a national level, maybe one example at national level, for example, in Nigeria, we're working with the Central Bank of Nigeria. And when you look at the access to finance data in Nigeria, you'll see they have progressed. They're at 74% in terms of access to finance. But when you drill down, you find that much of that success is in the southern region. And when you go to the northern region, you actually find that it's under 50%. And so what then do we do about that? So we're currently working on a project that is focused on the north. How do we increase access to finance in the north? Looking at the unique social cultural issues in the north, which are a barrier to access to finance. And then create and design programs that are suitable for that environment to move that number up.
The regional breakdown is, of course, very relevant here in Ethiopia too. So thank you for that reminder about the importance of regional data as well. So that's fantastic. And also you're working on the policy level, which is what the World Bank is doing. So how are you using gender disaggregated data for your advice on policy?
Sure. So, I mean, as a World Bank, obviously, we have our own corporate gender strategy and gender tagging that also influences how we, track all of the interventions, plus also even to an extent of being gender intentional to allocate dedicated programs and funding to gender objectives. But also with our clients, particularly with the government Ethiopia, we work in the financial sector in having gender disaggregated data. We are working with, so we have basically on the financial inclusion agenda, we have two types of data. We have the supply side data where the financial service providers make a report to the regulator, and that gets to be aggregated and analyzed and is used to inform policies and regulations. But at the same time, we have the demand side data that is through surveys that is conducted. So on the demand side, we're more or less, very well in terms of, we can always go deeper in terms of to understand better the segment, but that's well in place. But on the supply side data, there is a significant gap in, gender segregated data availability and also usage. So we have the basics, on account ownership and so on, but even that, the enforcement has been quite low. So because of that, some of the KYC, how the KYC data is processed, how it is reported and so on, there is a lack of standardized reporting templates, how the reports are being also shared to the regulator and to in a way that is used to analyze. So we have one project actually currently ongoing with the National Bank as part of a larger financial sector strengthening project that also looks at, introducing, having gender segregated data to be introduced for the whole financial sector. But there
standardizing it across the whole financial sector, so everybody's reporting the same data in the same way, so it can be useful for policymaking.
Correct.
Great.
And we are also exploring, having a sort of women's financial inclusion index that looks at, not only, women's participation in the sector as at the decision maker level, be it board, senior executive and director level, but also in the provision of financial services, how much percentage of lending is going to women entrepreneurs, consumer lending, saving rates, digital payments adaptation, usage, and so on. So we are currently working on a possible gender scorecard that will be...
Scorecards are always fun, aren't they?
Yes.
So we need to look for that, see how everybody's scoring.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Grace, I'm going to give you the last word. Please do share with us on the
for us, gender, following up the impact we have on gender across all our projects is sacrosanct. So we use data, first of all, in evaluation, in design. So in cases where we don't have baseline, we try to do some studies in advance. So for example, if we are supporting a financial institution, providing them like long-term finance, we want to look at their portfolio to see how many women are clients, how many women access credit. So if there are challenges, and if we find there are challenges, then we would use that to give them some technical assistance so that they can develop relevant products. But at the same time, we also insist on collecting data in our monitoring and evaluation framework. So making sure that at least for every intervention, for example, 30% beneficiaries are women, and that we try to follow even at the enterprise level to see what the impact is at the beginning and at the end.
Yes,
So-
comparing is very important.
So across all our interventions, be it transport, be it financial sector.
And do you share that publicly, the beginning and end, or is that
Yes,
just
we do.
internal?
Yeah, yes, we do. Because for public sector, all our appraisal reports are on our website, and the exit reports are also on our website. Of course, for private, we don't, because of the confidentiality, we don't provide that information, but we do what we call some thematic evaluations, and that information is always in the public domain.
It's always great when you can put things in the public domain, whether
Yeah.
it's a scorecard or whether it's reporting regionally or other things.
Yeah.
So as you're going to be doing in your great work at
Yeah.
UNDP.
So definitely,
that's
it's part of
fantastic.
our strategy. We have a gender strategy, which is part of our 10-year strategy. So it's on the public, on our website, and therefore we do.
Can you bring it close to your mic?
continuous
Your mic
evaluation.
needs to be closer to your mouth.
Sorry?
Yes, great.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that everything that we do is somewhere. It is always in the public domain.
Fantastic.
So our strategy is on the website. So when we do after midway and after, we put it on the website.
Genius.
Yeah, thank you.
We're going to thank you so much. And there's obviously, we could talk for a long time. And apparently the questions are coming on an iPad that I left over there. So give me a moment while there's questions. We've got time for questions. But Sinidu, where are you? How much time do we have? Edom. Okay, we have 10. And apparently the iPad has turned off. So Sinidu, I'm going to need you to find somebody with a question. Where are you? Can't see you. Sinidu, can you either ask, my iPad's turned off, the one so I can't see any questions. Okay, great. So, first one, Samuel. The absence of women's access to finance had led the continent to lose 95 billion in a year. How did you use your gender disaggregated data to compute that? Can you give us a really quick, it could be a really long one, can you give us a quick answer to that? Because that number is quite a powerful number.
So we look at 3 areas. We look at the income area. So you are able to see the work that men do and the work that women do, the money that men receive, the money that women do not receive. Statistically, there's always a tendency women may do more of the labor work in the agriculture sector or receive less income compared to men, and we computed that number from the income side. We look at also opportunity cost. So if women were in this sector, what would have been the economic difference that their presence in that sector would have contributed? And that opportunity is also computed. We also compute, the third area we tend to look at is looking at policy barriers in a range of sectors, and then computing those barriers to women from a financial term and adding those. So 3 key variables we use in our analysis, and based on that we come with the number that at least $95 billion has been lost in income, been lost in opportunity, is being lost in barriers.
So that's really compelling. There's a huge loss to the economy, but also to women through this. There's several questions about rural. I'm going to ask you each to say one thing. You talked about collateral and overcoming those barriers, but the exclusion rates for women in rural areas are the highest of any group. And so what needs to be done to address women access and usage, as everybody said, in rural areas. Can you just each pick one thing that you think is most important? Teddy's grabbing the microphone, so I'm going to ask for you to go first. One thing.
So I think, yes, in terms of, when we talk about basic access to finance, definitely we have a long way to go. And if you are a woman living in a rural Ethiopia, young women in particular, you are more likely to have no access to financial inclusion, access to financial accounts, even just to have the simple bank account. There are different, reasons or drivers of...
No, I don't want reasons. I want a solution. What are you doing?
So, I mean,
right, that was the question, was the solution. So sorry, I had to interrupt you.
So yeah, so the solution would be, targeted intervention in the rural areas, but we can go on all day long.
So under the programs that the bank is doing, targeted interventions in rural areas. Angela.
So one of the challenges is literacy, digital and financial literacy for people in rural areas. And so our interventions are, the solutions to that is we empower the financial service providers and advocate for them to include digital and financial literacy initiatives in their offering. I can say it's not easy, but we've been advocating for that and working with institutions to do that, so that when they're delivering, they are coupling that with education to the target group to enable them.
So it's a very general term. So can you just give a little bit more specific? Are you talking about how to do financial statements for women small entrepreneurs? What do you mean by that?
So actually, recently we've even included the business aspect. So business, which is basic business management skills. Financial literacy is about how to manage your loan product, for example, that you acquire from a bank, or how to save for a goal. And then digital literacy is if the product is being delivered via a digital solution, then they need to know how to use it, how to access that product, how to interact with the institutions whenever they have a challenge. So it's creating simple curriculums that the financial service provider can use with their existing officers, the field officers, when they are going to engage with their customers, that they are able to deliver this education.
So those of you who are financial service providers here, there's a great opportunity to improve the success of your loans with women entrepreneurs if you are working with them on how to improve. Although one really interesting data point that was shared earlier was when it comes to saving in groups, which is often a rural typical way of saving, that women and men are not that different. And so there's obviously a savings I don't know if it's habit or a practice that is able to be built on in rural areas. Did you want to maybe talk about savings? No, okay. We can come back on to, you want to talk about savings.
Yes, so maybe just want to add one more thing, just one point, very important, which I think will address most of the, how we fix it. So I think the biggest indicator of being financially included, having a full range, is access to economic opportunity. So if a person is part of the labor market or engaged in business, or has education and living in urban or semi-urban, then that person that is the biggest indicator of being financially included. Of course, there is, when we talk about deepening, there are others.
I'm going to interrupt you again. What are you doing in rural areas?
Yeah. So
sorry.
So in particular, as the World Bank, we don't have a specific intervention. We work on the policy and regulatory level in terms of to unlock. But one indicator could be digital ID. So one challenge that people do have in particular rural context is, lacking access to ID. I'm sure Gabriel will talk about the national ID efforts, but the World Bank is financing the national ID. But one example would be the Safety Net program, where we have 8 million people benefiting from the program, and we have been digitizing payments, government payments from cash to through electronic accounts. So through that intervention, we have around 1.2 million accounts that have been created just because of that intervention, where we are shifting the cash transfers into electronic accounts. We are also piloting at this stage for a couple of regions in Eastern Ethiopia, even mobile money services, which also includes a whole package of you get a phone, you get a SIM card, you get a digital account. So we are also seeing promising results on that aspect as well.
Thank you for mentioning the PSMP program, which you're digitizing, which many of the recipients are in rural areas. Thank you. I should have asked you about that, but thank you for mentioning that. And of course, that's a great link to the next panel, which is going to be the representative of the ID authority. So that's fantastic. Thank you, Grace. Rural areas.
I think in rural areas, you mentioned groups. We try to intentionally help women to form groups so that they can access services in a more efficient manner. And in some cases, you find that it's easier for microfinance institutions to lend to groups. But I also think improving infrastructure so that there's quality telephone connectivity.
Yes.
In case you are to support them through the digital platform to access finance, access advisory services, access market information, etc. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
The whole infrastructure
Absolutely.
is vitally important if women in rural areas are going to be able to access and use financial services.
Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning that. Last word, Samuel.
Yes, just two things. Two things we're doing. Many things, but two that I want to mention in rural areas. First, I want to start by thanking the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund. In partnership with them, we are working to help recover businesses lost by rural women in northern Ethiopia. And we've managed through their resources to reach 1,000 small businesses so far in injecting resources, retraining them in really how to manage this business. So that's one area of MSMEs support in rural areas that we are investing in. Second is in the energy sector. With support from China, we are working in 3 regions, focusing specifically on women knowing the energy, the solar panel technology. So basically training them in the use of the technology and also investing in their small businesses to sell solar panels. And that has helped, at least so far, we've managed to reach 800,000 households, women's households in rural communities with that investment between UNDP and China. And so there are many intentional rural investments that can be done, and that can be done easily now in today's world, that all of us, I think, can invest in to elevate rural women out of poverty.
Thank you. Thank you for the, 5 people asked about rural areas, so thank you so much. They were great questions. And please join me in thanking an amazing panel, and I know you're going to want to talk to them more later. Thank you so much, each of you, for coming. Edom, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ruth. Everybody, could you please give a warm thank you to our panelists? And of course, thank you to our moderator, Dr. Ruth. That was a very insightful and very targeted panel. And I'd like to say thank you for keeping it in time, because it is now 11:06 and it is time for our health break. When we come back, we will have our panel on bridging the gender gap, women's participation in financial markets. So let's reconvene in a hard 25 minutes back here at 11:30. Yes? Great, I'll see you then. Yes? Found our energy again? Awesome. So our next panel is going to start. I hope that all of our panelists and our moderators are in the room. As the rest of the party trickles back into the room, I am going to be introducing our moderator and fearless leader, and she will be moderating the panel and introducing our panelists. As I mentioned when we started our day, she has shaped Ethiopia's financial landscape, notably by spearheading the adoption of international financial reporting standards. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say welcome to the CEO of FSD Ethiopia, Mrs. Hikmet, our moderator for the second panel.
ሀሳባችሁን ሰብስቡ ባካችሁ. We will start now. Thank you. I think we had a wonderful discussions today, and I think we thanked the panelists, but I don't think we thanked our moderator, Dr. Ruth Goodwin. Please a round of applause for Dr. Ruth. I have three very interesting panelists. We're going to delve down in areas that wasn't addressed in the first panel. Let me first introduce Dr. Tilahun Kasahun. Dr. Tilahun, can you come and then I'll make the introductions like Ruth, Hannah, and Gabriela. Doctor, بمحل بدكم بمحل كنت بتلتسلي. Exactly. Let me introduce Hannah Tahluku. I don't think she needs any introductions, but in any case, joining us is Hannah Tahluku, the new Director General of the Ethiopian Capital Markets Authority, a seasoned legal expert with degree from Mekelle and Addis Ababa universities. She's known for her tough stand on financial crime and corruption. Her leadership at ECMA is vital for fostering transparent markets that empower women in finance. Round of applause, please. Dr. Tilahun Kasahun is the founding CEO of the Ethiopian Securities Exchange, launched just 2 months ago on January 10th, 2025. He's being a driving force in building Ethiopia's first security exchange, transforming our financial markets by enabling secondary trading of shares and securities, key to unlocking capital for women entrepreneurship. Gabriela Abraham, also on our panel, is Legal and Policy Director at Ethiopian National ID Program, with over 12 years in law, academia, and public service. She's researched gender mainstreaming and supported women's rights through the Ethiopian Women's Lawyers Association. Her work on digital ID is paving the way for inclusive financial access. In this panel, we're hoping to tackle some of the questions that were raised this morning, particularly in terms of identifying barriers to accessing investment opportunities for women, including socio-cultural norms, limited financial literacy, and lack of networking, and perhaps look at what the new financial markets as CMA and stock exchange, what new products are coming to the market to tackle some of the issues identified this morning. We will also explore how the capital markets ecosystem can better address the specific needs of women to access to finance, including improving their leadership roles. We will discuss the readiness of stakeholders within the capital markets ecosystem to tackle existing challenges faced by women and to implement solutions that enhance their participation and contribution. I just want to point out that I'm not going to be as lively as Ruth, and I'm not going to go all over the stage, but I'll just be standing here and asking my panelists questions. I'll start with Hannah. Hannah, perhaps, as a woman leader in the ecosystem, how does the current policy framework for the capital markets address gender equity and inclusivity? I also want you to speak to how does being a woman leader contribute to the organization and its work within the ecosystem?
Thank you, Hikmet, and thank you, everyone. But before I go into capital markets and women, because you've heard a lot about the gender gap in the financial sector, but why are we here talking about women? For me, it's not only because this exercise would benefit a lot of women who are in poverty. Our previous panelists and keynote speech makers have made a point into giving you a proper statistics into the gender gap, particularly in the financial sector. But I want to give you a little bit of data in terms of how women can benefit the economy of Ethiopia and the continent and the globe, of course. Because we're not doing this just because women are disadvantaged and 1 out of 10 women are living in poverty, and most women, out of which number are living in sub-Saharan Africa, women have a limited digital access. For example, they have only 37% digital access. But because women leadership has benefited the world, has benefited the continent, and has benefited Ethiopia. You know, when we... For example, in non-financial sector, when you see, for example, pandemics like COVID, women-led countries have exhibited 6% less death in the world. You remember the leaders in Europe, Asia, and even in America. So in terms of the financial sector and the development of economy, you know, Sam rightly gives you the numbers in Africa, so I don't want to repeat the numbers Sam have provided, but bringing and closing the gender gap in the economic development will bring about, I'd say, close to $7 trillion to the economy. So it's a huge number. So bringing women to the economic development endeavor would not just benefit women, but benefit the entire globe in general. That's why we're here. That's why we're working towards, you know, building an inclusive capital market in Ethiopia and beyond. You know, coming to the capital market, as you know, I'd see capital market development in Ethiopia as a second chance for Ethiopia to redeem the gender gap in the financial sector. As you know, for example, if you take the private banking in Ethiopia, we've had private bankings for the past 30 years. As far as my knowledge is concerned, we only have 2 or 3, if we don't have 2 CEOs in the private banking. So basically the capital market, in terms of the exchange, in terms of the capital market itself as a regulator and as a capital market service provider, it's, I'd say, a place whereby we can redeem ourselves in terms of gender gap and making sure we have an actual representation, meaningful representation of women both at the regulator, the exchange, infrastructure, and other capital market service providers. And I'd assume I'd be one of the examples that Ethiopia is making the right choice and bringing women as a lead for the regulator at the capital markets. But in terms of general capital market principles, as you know, transparency and disclosure are at the heart of capital markets. And in our regulations of capital markets, we have, I'd say, transparency and non-disclosure at the heart of it, non-discrimination at the heart of our disclosures, our market participants, our listing rules, and everything. But the principles and the regulations are not enough because we have to be cognizant and we have to be very attentive of existing biases, how we interact with the regulations, how we set up institutional frameworks, and how we interact even with the existing data. So we have to be very cognizant of all these issues. As I have mentioned it earlier, as a lead of a regulator, ECMA, my existence, my presence will for sure signal that leadership in the financial sector and having a meaningful voice is attainable. And because I have experienced myself of the challenge of women, I am committed to make sure that the voice of diversity is heard and be incorporated in our policy documents, regulations, and practices. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anna. Perhaps to Tilahun, what role do you think ECX will play in terms of women access to finance? Something different besides the traditional financial institutions.
Sure, thanks. Good to be invited. I think we've had a bit of back and forth with Sinidu, why I would have preferred Yodit, our Chief Business Officer, to sit in this panel than myself. But nevertheless, I think it was the right thing to do. I agree. This is I think my second panel sitting in a woman gender-related conference this week. And I would say, especially for an exchange that's very young and actually hasn't yet delivered on its promises, quite a bit of, I would say, advertisement. Nevertheless, I think this is the two things that come into mind when I talk about, I would say, capital markets in general and gender is very much related to how we talk about traditional finance, banking and other forms of finance, and gender, which is, I would say, if we make something very efficient, very accessible, irrespective of both genders, I would say, would be more successful in ensuring access to finance for women than men. And I'll try to justify this by, you know, if the ability for a women-led business to initially, for instance, you know, get business license, be able to pay taxes, meet with financial sector colleagues, get access to finance, come to markets, trade, export, etc., has improved, that would already make sure, you know, we would by then make sure that access to finance is more or less manageable and grows and entrepreneurship for women is really working. I think that same sense of logic applies on capital markets. For ESX, we would achieve our objective generally for ensuring access to finance for women has improved if we ensure that broader access to finance has been facilitated, saving has improved, finance is going to the right direction. For instance, you know, during the earlier panel, there was a conversation about, you know, some date weights investment in real estate or this or that forms of investment. So I would say capital markets have, where they have been successful, they were successful when, for instance, banks, microfinance institutions have had the opportunity to come to the capital market, raise funds in a competitive manner, and then go and invest in women-led businesses, lend in women-led businesses. The other form of, you know, very much direct intervention is, I'm afraid to say, very challenging. It's challenging for men-led businesses. It's even worse for women-led businesses. If a woman-owned business entrepreneur cannot, you know, prepare a financial plan or a business plan or find some sort of, you know, audited financial report to submit to, you know, an investment bank to bring them to capital markets, it will be very much difficult to actually imagine if, you know, the number of listed companies in the world is now more than 10,000, I would say. Go to our neighbors, Nairobi, now more than 60, 65 companies. So we're not here to, I would say, celebrate 5 or 10 women-owned businesses or women-led businesses that came into the exchange and got listed. And I would say we shouldn't measure our success by these very, I would say, very indirect methods. I'd be very happy if Development Bank of Ethiopia or this bank or that bank come to our market, raise a couple of billion birrs. Essentially, their wholesale business supports more women than the number of listed companies on the exchange. So I think fundamentally this would be the way how capital markets and the exchange would like to address the environment. But I think I was already seeing, you know, Teddy struggle to show how sometimes, for instance, you know, at the World Bank, never mind, I worked at the IFC before, essentially when you do something that is really fixing the fundamentals, the basis, it's very difficult to show impact. So today, for instance, we're happy to say, because of our interbank money market, more than, I would say now, 200, 300 billion birr have interacted, have exchanged between the financial sector and institutions, primarily banks. Essentially, we go home thinking, because of the fact that we improved liquidity in the banking sector, a woman-owned business or an entrepreneur who made it to the bank branch and have been able to withdraw 5,000 birr, 10,000 birr, unlike in other days where it was very challenging sometimes to find liquidity in the banking sector. So these are very indirect, I would say, ways and tools capital markets contribute. And I think at the exchange, I would say, although we will talk about later on, you know, other tools such as, you know, investment crowdfunding, SME-friendly growth markets boards, I would say their impact is very much limited to compare to the very indirect and the very fundamental types of interventions that markets like ours contribute. Thank you.
Thank you. Gabriela, national ID has been introduced. I can't remember how long has it been now, but tell us, yeah. Thank you, Dila.
Since 2022.
Since 2022. So can you share the statistics of how many have registered and perhaps gender vis-a-vis, women vis-a-vis men. And then the data shows generally, this is a World Bank report in 2022, that women are 15% less likely than men to have a national ID. So since now our economy is gearing towards, if you don't have a national ID, you really can't access any of the financial services and other products in government. So yeah, let's hear about the statistics
Sure,
first.
thank you very much, Hikmet. It's quite delighting to be here. Let me just give you a background regarding the National ID program, just to set the context. This is a program established in 2022 with the aim of establishing a digital identification management system in Ethiopia. Our businesses are mainly two core businesses, which are enrollment, meaning registering residents. We are a biometric-backed identification system, meaning we uniquely identify the identity of a person using fingerprint, iris scan, and facial picture. The other core business is authentication. So coming back to your question, I have a good news and a bad news. The good news is women are using as much authentication as much of, am I audible now? Okay, sorry. Women are using as much authentication as the number of registration, but we still have gap. From the total of 12 million registration currently, 40% are women, meaning 60% are men. So we have a 10% gender gap. We have closed the gender gap by we have narrowed the gender gap by 5%, but we still have 10% gender gap. So the rate of disaggregate data in terms of enrollment is 40-60, but the authentication is also the same, meaning women are using digital ID to access services as much of their registration. Yeah.
So can you tell us perhaps what specific strategies you have to address this issue, especially those for women in the rural areas?
So, sure. I think it was Leah from UNCDF who was mentioning about intentionality. That's quite key for us. Starting from the early stage of our implementation, we conducted a gender gap assessment. It's good to identify what inhibitions exist in the public sphere, in the social and economic sphere, to find out what actual challenges exist prohibiting women from having access to ID. So through this gap assessment, we have identified that some of the key challenges are associated with social norms, associated with, associating ID with masculinity and womanhood. That's one. The other challenge is physical accessibility of government structures and existing mechanisms for women. Women are less likely to invest their limited financial as well as time resources to go out and register for other forms of government services, in addition to national IDs as implemented elsewhere as well. So these are the key gaps that were identified. And last but not least, and which is quite critical, is the existence of bureaucratic structures in enrolling women. This applies for everyone in general, but women are less likely to have access to traditional form of ID, which limits them from having access to other forms of services, including national IDs. So after identifying these hurdles and challenges, we designed in our program that our enrollment sites have to be accessible for women. Currently, we're accessible at 900 registration centers nationally. We're using collaboration and partnership with government entities which have operational excellence, such as Ethio Telecom. We're also planning to onboard super agents, which are private sector actors, which will be involved to specifically and dedicatedly to work on enrollment process of the National ID program. So physical accessibility is as much important because due to social norms, women are more likely to spend their time on household chores, engagement in the formal economy, in the informal economy, so they have limited time to go out and get registered. So accessibility of government going to women, going to places where women can have physical access to registration centers is very much important. So that's one of the key strategies we're trying to implement. In that process, we're aiming at the apex of our registration kits, which are currently under procurement as well. We're adding up to 4,600 registration centers nationally. So from the current 900, we're planning to scale up to 4,600 so as to include remote, rural, peripheral areas which otherwise would be excluded from this type of national implementation and operation. The other key item, as I mentioned earlier, is exclusion due to bureaucratic hurdles. So if there are more and more requirements regarding what documents need to be brought for registration, if there are stringent verification mechanisms, that becomes a challenge and inhibition for women to go out and get registered. So because we are a biometric-backed identification system, we rely so much on the biometric data we collect. And so the point of entry for registration is quite minimal. We accept more than 33 different types of documents for registration as a proof of identity. If a person cannot bring a proof of identity, we register residents on the basis of introducer. And so women who lack identification documents already can get registered through someone introducing them as an introducer. So those key strategies are quite key in terms of ensuring accessibility. The other element which is quite key again is that women are less likely to spend their time on this type of activities unless they see value in doing so. So we're trying to build an ecosystem around the digital identification system. We've integrated with more than 15 institutions, and this is going to scale up as we go forward as well.
Thank you, Gabriela. Maybe let me come back to you, Dr. Talahun. You mentioned the products in the pipeline that women might benefit from, women-led businesses, perhaps MSMEs too. But you talked about having a audited financial statement and really being ready, investment ready for women-owned businesses. Do you have a plan to enhance the capacity of women-owned businesses? And also perhaps, since we helped support the digital learning platform, how's that doing in terms of gender?
True. So that goes back to exactly what I was saying, right? So when we see transaction cost, generally, we often forget information cost is the biggest cost of all. So in that sense, if we cannot introduce what capital markets are, what the role of the exchange is, and what products are available for anyone, but in particular for women, just like as Gabriela said, it probably will take, it will be 2 or 3 times burdensome for a woman-led business, a young girl entrepreneur, to come to workshops like this, because if you count the number of workshops we do, and then by the number of participants, only when it's about gender that we probably have a room full of women in the room. So in general, access to the information is still burdensome. So that was one area that we really wanted to tackle, and I always said, and I think I do this genuinely. I say, if you were the first person and probably the first timer to talk about a topic, understand the topic, teach a topic, speak about a topic, you would most likely influence, and you will most likely be empowered, get into positions, and etc. etc. So the capital markets was just an ideal space for that. It was new. Men and women have equal opportunity to understand it. Then if, for instance, a CFO in a bank, if it's a lady, or a strategy officer in a bank, if it's a lady and understands one of these products that we're all confused about, she could better explain this back to the boardroom, back to the management room. She has a better opportunity to lead initiatives around capital markets. So that was full gratitude. What we wanted to do was to actually minimize our financial costs on workshops and this, but with small investment, introduce a digital academy. A very modest exercise, I would say. And again, I don't know, now maybe we're hitting 15,000, 20,000, but still, compared to having 10,000 individuals on a workshop, at least this is something that's still always there, always accessible. That's one thing what we wanted to do, access. Second was, access to the market. Usually, whenever capital markets are structured, because it was, really competitive, listing requirements and requirements from, I would say, intermediaries was a bit challenging for women-led businesses and entrepreneurs. So when we created the market, we had what we call both the main market. That would be, for instance, a woman that has a woman-led business that has 500 million and above capital. So they must have started from a 50 or 100, but then they raised another 100 or 200 or 300 and made it to 500. That's such a high mark. But then we wanted to create a growth market, what we called, our SME market. So the minimum capitalization would be 50 million. And we felt that's still also on a high end for Ethiopians. So that's where we went back again and tried to, with the support of FSD Ethiopia, we wanted to create what we call a regulated investment crowdfunding platform. That's still on the making. But the idea is, if you do not build, that ladder, I would say, steps for young entrepreneurs to raise $1 million or 2 or 5 million burn a capital market space, then make it to 50, then make it to 500, it is going to be a bit intimidating if you start from the high end. Maybe I'll stop here by saying, I would say the other products that are, I would say, more gender-friendly our products are yet to come. And I think, DG Hanna will say a little bit more about that. But you will see, down the line, all the products that we talk about may have, I would say, with all luck, have a better advantage for women than men. Just to give you an example. We, again, because we were simply ambitious or because this is something that was fancy for other markets to do, we wanted to create a market where individuals should be able to access the market from the tip of their mobile phone. Yes, it took other markets some 50 years, 100 years sometimes, to be where they are. If, with the support of Gabriela, which was actually my student, now I remember how old I am, this is 12, 13 years ago, that we have now a national ID, women can onboard themselves into market without, physically going to a broker's office, which used to be really a macho man. If you can imagine Mercato with all brokers and very difficult and intimidating environment, that was exactly how capital markets were created. So now that if you facilitated that, make it easy, onboarding is easier, you can start saving from, 5 birr, 100 birr, 200 birr. It is really much useful for women than men, because in general, it would have been easier for men to kind of, go around very difficult situations and then make investments. So this is coming for both from, coming at it from both entrepreneurs in terms of raising funds, but also women that are trying to save and make little investments. Again, top of my head, what I have is Awadai or, Jimma or, these marketplaces where usually it's women that are sometimes sent to market. They sell something, they buy another, and I think you wonder why we don't have financial inclusion. It's because, either one, our ways and means of saving is really traditional, or we don't save that much. So productivity is where we need to improve. But even where we had the opportunity to save, those were not accessible. So I would not have imagined, capital markets if it's not easy for women to open an account, throw money, not on a listed company. That would still be intimidating, very challenging. But maybe a money market fund or an equity fund that does not, require for that woman to understand what is it doing with the funds. As long as, Hannah is doing a good job regulating that fund, they would simply throw in 5 birr, 100 birr, 200 birr. That fund selects the type of equity, that selects the type of bond, that selects the type of, other alternative vehicles that they would invest in. So, in a way, I think capital markets can be geared towards, a more woman-friendly type of, ecosystem. But that doesn't mean they're, easy from get-go. Like I said, if you ask a woman to, prepare a financial report, an audited financial report, to come to market, it means we're already, building our, foundation on something that's already challenging for women. So we have to be a bit intentional and address it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Hannah, perhaps. So how does the capital markets bring new opportunities? And what potential does it hold for supporting women within the ecosystem? Perhaps within the, And you talked about being the voice of diversity earlier on. How do you intend to do that?
Thank you so much, Hikmet. And I appreciate Dr. Talahun's work in managing the expectations. I absolutely second that, because we're not saying we're going to solve every gender-related issues overnight, not even in a year or 10, but we're just saying that we're very cognizant of that issue. in terms of capital market, one thing it does is it kind of broadens and provides depth for the discussion of financial inclusion we've been discussing with our previous panels and other colleagues who've been on this stage. So it's not only having some kind of savings account, not only even, you know, the percentage declines when we talk about real access to finance, for example, in terms of lending and having access to loan facilities in different financial sectors. Capital market goes even beyond this two issues. We have both demand and supply side of it. Of course, we have the entrepreneurs who can have access to capital to start business, expand their own businesses. In terms of, you know, investment, women can invest, and especially there is a thing called gender lens investing, whereby women themselves or maybe anyone can invest. Women own businesses, women led businesses, maybe with companies that are gender sensitive, that promote gender equality and works towards having, you know, promoting women's rights in their businesses, or maybe those companies who produce services and products that basically ease the lives of women. So it's not just one thing, but it has different areas. In terms of capital market, the first priority we have is financial literacy. As you have heard it, I don't mind repeating myself and others, because financial literacy is really important. Teaching women to have money, how to make money, how to hold on to that money, and make sure that money makes more money to them, to their family, and to their community. So one of the basic tools in my eyes would be financial literacy, especially capital markets has a lot of jargons to it, a lot of intricacies, a lot of participants in it, a lot of machineries in it. So financial literacy in understanding the risks and possibilities capital market brings to the economy and even to women. So we had different financial literacy programs, especially the ones, it's not here yet, you know, for the purpose of managing expectations, but we have been preparing the necessary documents to have to basically blend in technology, digitalization, and diversifying the languages we use. I wish I can speak in Amharic, to be honest. I can't lie to you. Someone raised their hands. Should I speak in Amharic? It's only because we have a few guests that speak English, but I can speak in Amharic because they love the Amharic language, I know that. So እንደ ካፒታል ገበያ ባለስልጣን በጣም በርካታ የፋይናንስ እውቀትን ሊያሳድጉ የሚችሉ ፕሮጀክቶችን ለመስራት በጣም ፍላጎት ኖሮን ከተመሰረትንበት ጊዜ ጀምሮ ለመስራት እየሞከርን ያለነው። አንደኛው ትልቁ ፕሮጀክታችን ቴክኖሎጂን በመጠቀም ለምሳሌ ቴሌግራም ሊሆን ይችላል በ5 የኢትዮጵያ ቋንቋዎች በሚቀጥሉት ከ3 እስከ 5 ዓመታት በሚሆኑ ጊዜያት 7 ሚሊዮን የሚደርሱ ኢትዮጵያውያንን የካፒታል ገበያ ጽንሰ ሐሳቦች ምንድናቸው፣ የካፒታል ገበያ ይዟቸው የሚመጣው እድሎች፣ ተስፋዎች እና ደግሞ ሪስኩ ምንድነው የሚለውን የሚያሳዩ ፕሮግራሞች ቀርጸናል። እንዳልኩት በኋላ ኮላቦሬሽን ላይ መጣበታለሁ። በጣም ኪ ስለሆነ እሱን በእንግሊዘኛ ለመናገር ሞክራለሁ። ሌሎች ከዩኒቨርሲቲዎች ጋር ከትምህርት ሚኒስቴር ጋር በመሆን ከዩኒቨርሲቲዎች ጋር የጀመርናቸው ፕሮግራሞች አሉ። ሁለት ዊንግ ነው ያላቸው እነዚህ ፕሮግራሞች። የመጀመሪያው ሴቶችና ወጣቶች የካፒታል ገበያ የማያቋርጥ የሰው ኃይል ፍላጎት አለው። እንደምታውቁት ራሱ ካፒታል ገበያ ባለስልጣን እንደ ኤክስቼንጅ ያሉ ኢንፍራስትራክቸሮች እና ሌሎች የካፒታል ገበያ አገልግሎት ሰጪ ተቋማት፣ ስለዚህ የነሱን ፍላጎት ለመሙላት ይሄ ደግሞ ሴቶች በብዛት ወደዚህ ገበያ እንዲመጡ ብዙ ሴቶች በመጡ ቁጥር ታውቃላችሁ ትሪክሊንግ ኢፌክት አለው አይደለም። ሴንሲቲቭ የመሆን ለሴቶች ጉዳዮች የሴቶችን ችግሮች አንደርስታንድ የማድረግ ለዛ የሚሆኑ መፍትሄዎችና የህግ ማቀፎችን ለማዘጋጀት በጣም ኪን ይሆናሉ ሴቶች። ስለዚህ የበለጡ ሴቶች እንዲመጡ ከትምህርት ሚኒስቴርም ጋር የጀመርናቸው ፕሮግራም አለ። ስለዚህ የመጀመሪያው ይሄ ነው። ሌሎች ግን የሴቶችን ሊጠቅሙ የሚችሉ ቅድም ጥላሁን በጣም እንዳለው ዝም ብሎ ሴቶች የሚመሯቸው ወይም ሴቶች ባለቤት የሆኑባቸውን ተቋማት መደገፍ ብቻ ሳይሆን በቤታቸው የሚገኙ ሴቶችን ህይወት ሊለውጡ የሚችሉ ፕሮዳክቶችን የካፒታል ማርኬት ፕሮዳክቶችን እንዲፈጠሩ ፋሲሊቴት የማድረግ የማገዝ ስራ እየሰራን ነው የምንገኘው። ኤፍኤስዲ ኢትዮጵያ ኦፍ ኮርስ ትልቁ ፓርትነራችን ነው። ጀንደር ቦንድ የምንለውን ስኮፒንግ ስተዲ ለመስራት እየሞከርን ነው። ያሉን የህግ ማቀፎች ጀንደር ቦንድን ኢንትሮዲዩስ ለማድረግ በቂ ናቸው አይደሉም፣ ምን ጥቅም ይዞ ይመጣል፣ ምን አይነት ሬጉሌሽን ኢንትሮዲዩስ ማድረግ አለብን፣ ምን ያህል ተቋማዊ ቅርጽ ሊኖረን ይገባል የሚለውን እያጠናን ነው የምንገኘው። እሱ በሴቶች የሚመሩ ተቋማትንና ሴቶችን ሊጠቅሙ የሚችሉ ፕሮዳክቶች ላይ ገንዘብ እንዲፈስ ያደርጋል ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ይሄ ሌላው ትልቁ የምንሰራው ነገር ነው። አንዳንዶቹ ፕሮጀክቶች ቱ ቢ ኦነስት ዝም ብላችሁ በወፍ በረር ስታዩቸው ሴቶችን የማይደግፉ በቀጥታ የማይደግፉ ይመስላሉ። ለምሳሌ ቅድም የተነሳው ኤስኤምኢዎችን በተመለከተ የአፍሪካንም የኢትዮጵያንም ዳታ ብታዩት ሲግኒፊካንት ፖርሽን ኤስኤምኢዎች የሚመሩት በሴቶች ነው። ስለዚህ ኤስኤምኢዎችን የሚጠቅሙ ፕሮጀክቶች ብለን ስናስብ አንዱ በልባችን ያለው ሀሳብ ሴቶችን በዛው መጥቀም ነው። በእኛ ቢሮ በኢትዮጵያ ካፒታል ገበያ ባለስልጣን ኤስኤምኢ አድቮኬት ኦፊስ ወይም ለኤስኤምኢዎች ጥብቅና የሚቆም አይነት ቢሮ አድርጋችሁ ልትወስዱ ትችላላችሁ። እንደሱ አይነት ከኦሬዲ ፕሮሚስ የተደረጉልን ድጋፎች አሉ። ኦሬዲ ቢሮ ተቋቁሟል፣ ሰው አሳይን አድርገንለታል። ግን ምን አይነት ድጋፎች ያስፈልጉታል የሚለውን ለማየት ነው። ብዙዎቻችሁ ዌብሳይታችንን አይታችሁ እንደሆነ አይፒኦ ክሊኒክ የሚባል ኢንትሮዲዩስ አድርገናል። ኢሹወሮችን ሰፖርት የሚያደርግ እዛ ውስጥ የሴቶችና የኤስኤምኢ ሴግመንት እንዲኖር ለዛ ታርጌትድ የሆነ ማለት ነው ሰፖርት እንዲኖር ለማድረግ እየሞከር ነው። ዲዛይኑ ተጠናቋል። አንዳንዶቻችሁ አፕላይ አርጋችሁ ይሆናል። በዚህ ለሁለት ዴሞንስትራቲቭ ትራንዛክሽን ብቻ 25 አፕሊኬሽን ነው የተቀበልነው። ከ25 ውስጥ 4 የሚደርሱ ተቋማትን አትሊስት ሁለቱን ለመምረጥ የሚያስችል የመጨረሻ ርቀት ሄደናል። ግን በሚቀጥለው ፕሮፐርሊ አይፒኦ ክሊኒኩ እንደ ክሊኒክ ሆኖ ሲደራጅ ሴቶችና ስሞል እና ሚዲየም ኢንተርፕራይዞችን ሰፖርት የሚያደርግ የራሱ ሴግመንት ይኖረዋል። ስለዚህ ሴቶችን በእጅጉ ይጠቅማል ብለን ነው የምናስበው። ሌሎችም ግን በተለይ ከኮርፖሬት ጋቨርናንስ እና ከኢኤስጂ ኮንሰፕት ጋር ተያይዞ በቂ ሴቶች በኢሹወር ሲሆኑ በካፒታል ማርኬት አገልግሎት ሰጪዎች ይሁኑ በቂ ሴቶች በማኔጅመንት ላይ ሪፕሬዘንት እንዲደረጉ ፑሽ ለማድረግ የሚያስችሉ አትሊስት ለጊዜው አስገዳጅ ባይሆኑ እንኳን እንደ ሪፈረንስ የሚያገለግሉ ቴክስት-ቡኮች ኦሬዲ አዘጋጅተናል። ለፐብሊኩ በሚቀጥሉት ቢበዛ 2 ወራት አክሰሰብል እናደርጋለን። ስለዚህ ተቋማቱ ጀንደር ሴንሲቲቭ ዳይቨርሲቲ ሴንሲቲቭ እንዲሆኑ ለማድረግ እየሞከርን ነው። this I have to speak it in English because it's a call for collaborations. ECMA as a regulator and the exchange and other government entities and private entities cannot really achieve this gender goals without collaboration from this wonderful companies, entities, DFIs and multilateral entities, because we've worked with AFD has been with us, UNDP has been with us from the beginning, and World Bank has supported the IPO design. So it's basically a call for collaboration for you to support the endeavors we had locally to, further our actions into narrowing the gender gap and promoting gender equality and inclusivity in the capital market in Ethiopia. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Let me go back to Gabriela. Maybe what are your future strategies? You talked about working with the private sector, especially in reaching women in the rural areas. Are you conscious of working with women-led businesses in terms of identifying the private sector entities?
True. So after finding out the gender gap existing in the enrollment process, we specifically designed women-only registrations with community-based organizations focused on women's financial inclusion. Unfortunately, it did not bring about the exact change we desired it will bring about. The registration was still much less than we expected. And so we're trying to study what exactly is going wrong in that space. But on a national scale as well, we're planning to have a very dedicated consultation session end of this March, and this is an open call for everyone who's interested to take part in this consultation. And someone in the morning presentation was mentioning about, this is not just a celebratory process every year that we do just because, it's the month of March. I think it was Saifu from UNCDF. And so we're planning to be very specific and strategic about this approach. We're hoping to bring together women representatives from all the regional states, from the Women in Social Affairs bureaus, development partners, local NGOs, community-based organizations working on women. And as an outcome, we're anticipating to have a technical working group which will support the process of national ID enrollment rollout, as well as the usage of digital ID with the interest of women included in the process to try and mainstream gender in both the aspect of enrollment as well as building an ecosystem around ID. So those are the key strategies we're envisioning as well as we're implementing.
I wonder, can you share the timelines and what's your plan in terms of including? How many do you want to include? By which date? Like your plan for 2 years?
So in terms of enrollment, we're planning to have 90 million registration by the end of 2027. This year's plan is 30 million, quite ambitious, but we're aggressively working towards achieving this, as there is also an international development agenda. The Sustainable Development Goals recognize access to ID as one of the key development agenda, and inclusion by 2030 of all people is also one of the key goals in the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're trying to achieve that and working towards it.
So can we assume that the 30 million, then you're targeting 50% as women?
Yes, that's the plan. But again, even if we have narrowed the gap, this is not something we're comfortable with. It's no space for us to say, oh, we have narrowed the gap. No. Equality has to be achieved. It should not be an afterthought. It should be part of the process. It has to be incorporated and included in our operation, legislation, policies, and strategies as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time, and perhaps Alahun, I'm not going to follow the script. If you were, you're a policymaker, if you had your way, what would you like to see in your space as stock market in the next 5 years as part of your legacy?
Sure. Since I think we're talking about gender today, so just to try to draw the picture of what we have as capital markets, where they are functional. These are young people, entrepreneurs who've sought funding from their family, then from private equity, venture capital, and then gradually grew to become the Apples, the Microsofts, I don't know, the Nvidias of today. You can, and that's literally the copy paste of our capital market structure that we brought on board from Europe and the US. You cannot achieve that, or maybe you can, you just have to imagine this is the environment that we're going to, try to replicate. But I have to imagine how young female entrepreneurs are coming to the ecosystem, right? So when I assume this is really a complex question for me, especially if we're talking about 50% of Ethiopians being illiterate, majority of women. Do we even imagine these people being entrepreneurs and coming to market? I wouldn't even dare to say that would be really where we will have an impact. That I would hope would have a very indirect impact. Like I said earlier, if my mother, an illiterate person, had an opportunity to go to a bank, a microfinance institution, borrow funding at a competitive rate, that would be a good success. But I would say the majority of the image that we have of a successful capital markets is built upon entrepreneurs coming to market and raising funds. If we make sure, thank God Gabriela is now working with National ID, but her colleagues and her friends, who've now the younger generation who is now educated, are the engineers, the scientists of the future. If we make sure there's equal opportunity for those to become entrepreneurs, business owners, I think the capital markets that we would have, if we're successful, would ensure equality of these genders. That means more or less the work has to be done a bit, early. We have to count the number of high school graduates that we have, the number of college graduates, the entrepreneurship skills that they have. Are they becoming more and more business owners, or are they being, hired by business owners, which unfortunately more could be men. That's one message that I have, which is if we create the entrepreneur mindset within our young generation, and if it's our daughters that are really imagining, owning a business and leading a government, that would be the way capital markets would be successful. Second, I would say even when we're successful in I would say kindling this entrepreneurial spirit, I would say it cannot be, one ecosystem cannot be successful on its own. I would say, for instance, just take national ID on its own. If every one of us have a national ID on its own, is not an impact. So its impact and our impact is related to someone else's work. So the work that you do on entrepreneurship, skill set, capital markets, banks themselves, the digital infrastructure that we've all worked on, someone else working on business licensing registration, someone else working on tax facilitation, and just making the ecosystem easier would help, like I said earlier, would help women business owners, young female entrepreneurs, more than they would benefit men. So it has to be a collective, I would say, effort. Thanks.
Thank you, Tilam. Same question to you, Hannah. What would you want your legacy to be in this area?
In terms of gender inclusion, I have to speak in Amharic again. እንግዲህ ሴቶችን በሚመለከት የመጀመሪያው ተስፋ ማረገው ነገር ይሄ የጀንደር ኢኳሊቲ ነገር ሜይንስትሪም ሆኖ ኢትስ ኖት ላይክ እንደዚህ በኋላ እየተሰበሰብን ማርች 4 ማርች 8 የምናከብረው ነገር ሳይሆን ሁሉም ሰው ኮንሽስ እንዲሆን የሚያደርግ በተለይ ቅድም ደግሞ ስለ ዳታ በጣም ሲነሳ ስለነበረ እንደው ሴቶችን በበቂ ሁኔታ እንኳን ኢንክሉድ ካላረግን በቂ ጊልት እንዲሰማን የሚያደርግ ዳታ ይኖራል ብዬ ተስፋ አረጋለሁ ኢን ዘ ካፒታል ማርኬትስም ቢሆን ምክንያቱም ነምበር ኦፍ ሼር ሆልደርስ አሴት አንደር ማኔጅመንት ብዙ ኢንዲኬተርስ አሉት የካምፓኒዎቹ ሊስት የተደረጉት ብዛት የካፒታል ማርኬት ዴቨሎፕመንትን የምንለካባቸው ሜትሪክስ ሁሉ በሴቶች አይን ታይተው በቂ እንዲሆኑ ነው የሚመኘው ግን በቂ እንኳን ባይሆኑ በቂ እንዳልሆኑ እንዲሰማን የሚያደርግ በቂ ዳታ ኖሮን ያንን ለማስተካከል የሚያስችል ኮሚትመንት ያለው ተቋም እንዲሆን እንደ ሬጉሌተር እንደ ኢሲኤምኤ ያን ነው የሚመኘው እንደ ኢኮሲስተም ግን አይ ዶንት ዋንት ቱ ስፖይል ዘ ሰርፕራይዝ ግን ኢን ዘ ካሚንግ በሚመጡት ጊዜያት የሚመጡ ሰርቪስ ፕሮቫይደርስ በሴቶች የሚመሩ ሲኢኦዋቸው ከሆነ ሲኢኦዋቸው ካልሆነ ደግሞ በቦርዳቸው ውስጥ በቂ ሴቶች ያሏቸው እንዲሆኑ ነው የምመኘው ሌላው እንግዲህ በካፒታል ገበያ ውስጥ እንደምታውቁት ፋይናንሻል ሴክተሩ በወንዶች ዶሚኔት የተደረገ ነው በተለያዩ ምክንያቶች ቅድም በተጠቀሱትም ባልተጠቀሱትም ምክንያቶች ማለት ነው ሴቶች በጣም ብዙ ከወንዶች የበለጠ ስዌት ማያረጉበት ኢንዱስትሪ እንዲሆን እመኛለሁ ምክንያቱም ኢኳሊ ኳሊፋይ የሚያደርጉ ወንድና ሴት ቢሆኑ ሁለቱም እኩል እድል ኖሯቸው እሷ የበለጠ ኳሊፋይ ተጨማሪ ስኪሎች ተጨማሪ ዕውቀቶች ተጨማሪ የጊዜ ዴዲኬሽኖች እንደሚኖርባት ሳይሰማት እኩል ኳሊፊኬሽን ያላት ሴት በኢትዮጵያ ካፒታል ገበያ በባለስልጣን ውስጥ በኢንፍራስትራክቸር እንደ ኤክስቼንጅ ባሉ ውስጥና በሌሎች ሰርቪስ ፕሮቫይደር ውስጥ በነጻነት ሪፕሬዘንት የሚደረጉበት በቂ ሴቶች በሃንድ ካውንትም እንዲኖር እመኛለሁ ግን ዋናው ቁም ነገር ግን ቅድም እንዳለው ከዚህ ሁሉ በሚሰበሰቡ ካፒታሎች የሚሰሩ ስራዎች የሴቶችን ኢኳሊቲ ፕሮሞት የሚያደርጉ ካምፓኒዎች ላይ የሴቶችን ህይወት በሚያቀሉ ፕሮዳክት ኤንድ ሰርቪሶች ላይ እና ሴቶች በኦን በሚያደርጓቸውና በሚመሯቸው ስሞል እና ሚዲየም እንዲሁም ስታብሊሽ ካምፓኒዎች ውስጥ ውሎ የሴቶች ህይወት ሲግኒፊካንትሊ እና ሚኒንግፉሊ እንደሚቀየር ተስፋ አደርጋለሁ ቴንክ ዩ ህክመት
I think, simply put, an Ethiopia where access to ID is equally accessible to women and men.
I got distracted. I didn't get to answer to ask you a question. For you, I think because you're relatively young, I think compared to us, if your organization actually, if you get to the 90 million by 2027 in terms of the national ID. What would be your personal target then? What would you like happen after that?
Tough question. Okay, just to finish the previous note, I think an Ethiopia that, in terms of access to ID, an Ethiopia which is equitable enough for women and men to have equal access to ID and usability of ID as well. Personal target, I'm hoping to elevate more in terms of my endeavor in the public service, and I hope to lead one of the public institutions in Ethiopia.
Good. We have a lot of questions on the QR code, so I don't know what to do. And she's only given me 5 minutes. My goodness. Maybe Gabriela, because this is one of the things that we're concerned about. What are the current initiatives in place to ensure data protection and privacy, to ensure transparency and appropriate data usage so that already vulnerable groups are protected?
Sure, I think this is a question that is a concern for everyone equally, because data protection is a human rights issue. As a country, we have legislated the Personal Data Protection Proclamation, which was promulgated in 2023, I believe, 2024, I believe. And with that, we have created a legal framework whereby personal data is processed on a legal basis. That framework exists and is implemented by the National ID program as well as other public institutions. Even prior to the implementation of this, the promulgation of this proclamation, the Ethiopian Digital Identification Proclamation recognized the need to ensure data protection throughout the identification management system, from collection to authentication. So we're very much cognizant of the need to ensure that data is processed in a legal manner, starting from the collection of data. It's a consent-based process unless it's mandated by a regulatory entity. And so the National ID program doesn't mandate the registration of residents. Secondly, data is not shared without the consent of the person. So we have a system in place. We consume a platform called MOSIP, which is a modular open source identification platform. Our technical team has scaled up and customized this platform, which is using privacy by design and security by design and by default as a primary principle of the system. And so while using this platform, the primary aim is to ensure that we're a source of data for other government and non-governmental institutions. And in this process, data will not be shared without the consent of the person at point of service. The only exception to this, which is legally mandated as well, is data shared based on court order and based on prior promulgated laws assigning other entities to have access to ID data. So the ensuring data protection throughout the process is very much important, as much as implementing the ID system itself as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. Dr. Telahun, you have a question here. How can low-income women can be grouped as they can participate as CIS, Collective Investment Scheme, at Stock Exchange? How can low-income women be grouped so that they can participate at Collective Investment Scheme?
Sure. So it was a tangential example that I mentioned earlier. So I think wait for Hannah to come up with a CISI directive. Then immediately what you will see, for instance, in Kenya, you have between, let's say, 30 to 40 collective investment scheme operators. These are generally banks, insurance companies, or non-financial institutions that's coming up to market and saying, look, I have a fund that would collect funds from the public, then invest it on these and that. And usually, because they really wanted to be secure and liquid, they call themselves a fixed income market fund or a money market fund, and some are equity funds. So if they are a fixed income market fund, what they would do is, they collect funds from women, let's say, 5 birr, 100 birr, 1,000 birr. Then they go to central bank, they buy a treasury bill today, which earns 15 plus. So compared to your saving, it's a better investment. And you can redeem it almost immediately. Sometimes there are limitations, but usually they are very liquid. And usually you get your coupon or interest into your account. So the benefit of this is, one, in terms of access, you really don't need to care about what treasury bills are, or Yegimjabe Senate, or bonds. You don't know the returns. You don't know where to buy them. All those things do not matter. What matters is you have an access to transfer funds, and then you have an access to to receive funds. So these are really easier instruments for developing markets in terms of broadening access to finance for women. So I would imagine one day we'll have a government a gender bond or a government bond or a sukuk bond that is really targeting women, and we all be right now sitting down in this room, contribute not a gift or a gratitude, but rather save and help ourselves as well. Good. That's a good example that we saw in Tanzania, for instance. Gender bond that is mostly invested by women.
Thank you so much. I think let's call it a day. Thank you so much for the panelists. Give them a round of applause, please. I think a lot of you are hungry, right? It's lunchtime now. So if you see your program, I'm supposed to have a closing remark and call for action. I mean, how am I supposed to summarize such wonderful discussions today? But I think, anyway, I think we spoke a lot about policy makers and policies. We spoke a lot about collaborative efforts by the various stakeholders. We talked a lot about data and particularly gender disaggregated data today. I think those were the highlights for me. I mean, nothing new, but I think these were the main areas, and many more. We acknowledge that legislative reforms can be really daunting and time-consuming. I should know, right? And Dr. Talahun and Hannah, and certainly updating the old ones is also daunting. So I think those of you in the room here that have capacity to convene, that have in your organization some form of responsibility to discuss, to take these forward, let's concentrate instead of pouring all our energy into lobbying new laws and updating archaic ones. I think we should shift our approach to perhaps communicate in a way that incentivizes policymakers to take notice of our issues that were discussed today. The language, as you all know, the language that traditionally resonates with government and policymakers is economic growth, right? So let's talk about access to finance for women and how it relates to economic growth of a country. So I think if when we meet next year or when we convene again, we should be looking at documenting some use cases and amplify successes of women and women-led businesses and voices so that the policymakers actually listen. In my work of SD Ethiopia, like I've said, we're very, very busy trying to run around making an impact and we don't spend enough time actually sitting down to analyze what our work in terms of impact it has in the work, in the realm and the sector that we're in. So if we concentrate on perhaps amplifying the voices of these women that have succeeded, maybe then we can, together we can make an impact at the policy level. I would like to thank everyone, the participants, for coming, particularly FSDE team. Can you stand up, please, wherever you are? FSDE team? No, you can't be having lunch. Yeah, job well done, because we're very busy at the end of the year, and this is one of many, many events this week. Well done, everyone, and thank you so much for the participants, especially the panelists that have traveled from Nairobi, and of course all the panelists that are here. Thank you for the media and all the comms people at the back. I stand before you and lunch, so that's the end of our day today. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank everybody for giving us your time and lending us your ear. And I am sure, like she said, we're all hungry, we're all hot, we want to get out. So one last housekeeping, lunch is going to be served on the hall outside. Please make sure that you guys get your coupons on your way out. If you need any assistance, our ushers and myself and our team is on standby. Have a good lunch, let the conversations keep going. Yeah? Okay, my name's Adom. I'm your MC. Have a good time. Bye.